The woman bleeding on Duke Rowan Blackthorn's sofa wasn't supposed to exist. At least not here, not like this. She was supposed to arrive in 3 weeks, in a carriage with her father's blessing, wearing silk and pretending to smile. Instead, she'd ridden through a storm that had killed 3 men last winter, crossed a bridge that no longer existed, and collapsed in his study, wearing nothing but his stolen shirt and mud-caked boots. Her first words weren't "hello" or "forgive me." They were, "I came to beg you to destroy both our futures." If you want to see how a marriage built on chains became the rebellion that shook an entire kingdom, stay until the end. Hit like and comment which city you're watching from. Let's build this community together. The storm had been screaming for 3 days. Rowan Blackthorn stood at the window of his study, watching the northern wilderness tear itself apart. Rain hammered the glass like fists demanding entry. Wind bent century-old pines until they shrieked. Somewhere in the darkness beyond his estate, the Greywater River had swallowed the only bridge connecting his land to civilization. He'd received the writer's report just before sunset, soaked and shaking, before the man collapsed in the kitchen. The bridge was gone. The road was impassable. The estate was an island now. Rowan should have felt trapped. Instead, he felt nothing at all. He'd learned not to feel years ago. Feelings were luxuries men in his position couldn't afford. He was the Duke of Thornmere, last of the Blackthorn line, guardian of the Northern Territories, and as of 6 weeks ago, engaged to a woman he'd never met. A woman whose father controlled half the kingdom's grain supply and needed Rowan's military alliances. A woman who would arrive in 3 weeks to become his duchess, his wife, his duty. Elena Whitlock. Even her name felt like a document he was required to sign. Rowan turned from the window, his reflection ghostly in the storm-dark glass. 32 years old, 6 feet of disciplined muscle and rigid posture. Dark hair he kept military short. A face his mother once called handsome before she died, and left him alone with a father who believed love was weakness. He'd accepted the engagement the way he accepted everything, with a curt nod and no questions. That was what Blackthorns did. They served, they protected. They married for strategy, not sentiment. The whiskey in his glass had gone cold. He was raising it to his lips when he heard the crash. Not thunder, something inside the house. Glass shattering, a heavy thud. Then silence so complete it felt alive. Rowan's hand went to the pistol in his desk drawer. 3 days isolated, no way in or out, and now someone was in his house. Bandits? Desperate travelers? His estate employed 12 staff, but half had left before the storm to help secure the villages. The remaining 6 were asleep in the servants' quarters. He moved through the corridor with the quiet precision of a man trained for war. The sound had come from the library, a room he rarely used, full of his mother's books and his father's disappointments. The door hung open. Firelight from the hallway sconces spilled inside. That's when he saw her. A woman, collapsed on the Persian rug near the cold fireplace, surrounded by shattered glass from the window she'd apparently climbed through. Her clothes were destroyed, a riding habit torn to ribbons, so soaked and muddy it was impossible to tell what color it had once been. Her dark hair hung in ropes across her face. One of her hands was bleeding, sliced open by glass. The other clutched something to her chest, a leather satchel she was protecting even in unconsciousness. She wasn't moving. Rowan's training took over. He holstered the pistol, knelt beside her, pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse was there, faint, fast, frightened even in sleep. She was alive. Hypothermic, probably. Injured, certainly. But alive. He should have called for help, should have woken Mrs. Graves, his housekeeper, should have maintained proper distance. Instead, he lifted the woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. He could feel her bones through the soaked fabric, could feel her body shaking with cold so deep it had become part of her. She'd been outside for hours, maybe longer, in a storm that had killed grown men. What kind of desperation drove someone to this? He carried her to his study, the only room with a fire still burning, and laid her on the leather sofa. Her skin was ice pale except for the blue-purple of her lips. The cut on her hand was still bleeding, leaving dark smears on his shirt. Rowan stripped off his jacket, covered her with it, then moved to build up the fire. As he worked, his mind cataloged details with military efficiency. Female, early 20s, well-born. Her ruined clothes were expensive once. her hands soft despite the calluses on her fingertips. Literate, probably. That satchel she'd protected suggested books or papers. She'd ridden here. There were mud patterns on her legs consistent with horseback, and he'd seen no carriage. Ridden here alone. Through a storm. To his estate. Why? The fire roared to life. Rowan turned back to find her eyes open. They were gray, storm gray, and they were staring at him with an expression that wasn't gratitude or relief. It was pure, animal terror. "Don't," she whispered. Her voice was raw. "Please don't." Rowan froze. He was still holding the poker from the fire, he realized. To her eyes, disoriented, probably concussed, he must look like a threat. He set it down slowly, raised both hands. "You're safe," he said. His voice came out rougher than intended. "You're in Thornmere Estate. I know who you are." She tried to sit up, gasped in pain, collapsed back. Her eyes never left his face. "You're Duke Blackthorn, Rowan Blackthorn. I've seen your portrait." That surprised him. "Who are you?" Something flickered across her face. Calculation, fear, resignation. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible over the storm. "Elena Whitlock." The world stopped. Rowan stared at her. At this half-drowned woman bleeding on his sofa. At his fiancée. The woman he was supposed to meet in 3 weeks at a formal engagement ball, wearing diamonds and false smiles. The woman who was supposed to arrive with her father's blessing and a dozen servants. Not like this. Never like this. "That's impossible," he said. "I wish it were." Elena's laugh was bitter. "I wish I were anyone else. Anywhere else. But I'm not. And neither are you. And we're both trapped in the same cage whether we want it or not." She tried to sit up again. This time Rowan moved without thinking, his hand going to her shoulder to steady her. She flinched at the touch, but didn't pull away. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the desperate clarity in her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know." She was shaking, from cold or shock, he couldn't tell. "I came to ask you something, before it's too late, before they seal the cage forever." "Ask what?" Elena looked at him then, really looked at him, and Rowan saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't even anger. It was hope, struggling against certainty of failure. "I came to beg you to end this," she said. "Cancel the engagement. Tell my father you won't marry me. Set us both free." The fire crackled. The storm raged. Rowan felt like he was falling through ice. "You rode through that." He gestured toward the window, toward the apocalyptic weather. "To ask me to break our engagement?" "I rode through that because it was my last chance." Her voice gained strength. "In 3 weeks, I'll be paraded in front of your world, wearing a dress picked by my father and a smile painted on by duty. They'll announce our engagement publicly. After that, there's no escape. For either of us. So yes, I rode through a storm. I crossed a bridge that's probably gone now. I climbed through your window like a thief because desperate people do desperate things." Rowan found himself sitting on the edge of his desk, suddenly unable to stand. "Your father agreed to this marriage." "My father sold me into this marriage." The bitterness in her tone could have stripped paint. "I'm a commodity. Grain futures and military alliances wrapped in silk. He doesn't care what I want. Nobody does. Except..." She stopped, her hand going to the satchel still clutched against her chest. "Except I hoped you might be different." "Different how?" "Different enough to refuse a bride who doesn't want you." Elena's eyes challenged him. "Different enough to choose honor over politics. My father will rage, the alliance will collapse, but we'll both be free to live our own lives instead of this performance they've written for us." Rowan felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built brick by careful brick since his mother's death. This woman had ridden through a killer storm to beg him for freedom. She was bleeding, freezing, probably concussed, and she was still fighting. It was the bravest thing he'd ever seen. It was also impossible. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "If I break this engagement, your father will punish me. I know." Elena's voice was steady. "But I'd rather face his anger than spend the rest of my life in a cage, even a gilded one." "It's not just about punishment." Rowan stood, began pacing, a habit from his military days. Your father controls the grain contracts that feed half the northern territories. If he withdraws them in retaliation, people will starve. Yes, I've thought about that. She closed her eyes. I've thought about everything, the politics, the consequences, the people who'll suffer. But I've also thought about what happens to me if I marry you. What happens to the person I could have been? And what person is that? Elena's eyes opened. In them, Rowan saw a fire that had nothing to do with the hearth. An artist, she said, a botanical illustrator. I've been offered a position in Florence, a real position, apprenticeship with Giuliana Rossi. She's the finest botanical artist in Europe. She saw my work at a private exhibition and offered to sponsor me. 1 year of study, and I could actually build a career, a life, my own life. Her hand moved to the satchel, opened it. Even soaked, Rowan could see papers inside. Drawings. But if I marry you, Elena continued, I become the Duchess of Thornmere. I sit in your great hall, I smile at your guests, I produce your heirs, and I never hold a paintbrush again except as a hobby to fill the hours between tea and dinner. That's not a life, that's a burial. Rowan found himself moving toward her, drawn by something he couldn't name. Show me. What? Your work. Show me what you're willing to risk your life for. For a moment, Elena just stared at him. Then, wincing, she drew out a portfolio from the satchel, oiled leather that had somehow stayed dry. Her hands shook as she opened it. The drawings inside stole Rowan's breath. They were flowers, but not the pretty decorative botanicals he'd seen in his mother's books. These were scientific and sublime all at once, each petal rendered with obsessive accuracy, each stamen labeled in elegant script, each leaf showing both surface and shadow. But beyond the precision was something else. Love. Every line showed reverence for the living thing it captured. This is the Cypripedium calceolus, Elena said softly, pointing to a drawing of a yellow orchid. Lady's slipper. Extremely rare. I found it in the marshes near my father's estate and spent 6 weeks documenting its complete life cycle. This one is Fritillaria meleagris, snake's head fritillary. It only blooms for 3 weeks each spring. I missed my cousin's wedding to finish this study. Rowan looked up from the drawings to her face. You're brilliant. The words came out before he could stop them. Elena's expression froze, surprise, disbelief, then something that might have been grief. No one's ever called me that, she whispered. My father calls me stubborn. My mother called me ungrateful before she died. My tutors called me obsessive. But brilliant? She shook her head. That's what they call men who study plants. Women who do it are just eccentric. Then they're fools. Rowan set the portfolio down with careful reverence. These are museum quality, publication quality. If Giuliana Rossi offered to sponsor you, she's not doing it out of charity. It doesn't matter, Elena's voice broke. I can't accept. My father forbade it. He forbade me from even discussing it. When I tried to argue, he locked me in my room for a week. So I stopped arguing. I stopped fighting. I pretended to accept the engagement, and then I planned this. This? Writing to you, begging you to refuse me. She looked at him with naked desperation. You're my last chance. If you tell my father you won't marry me, if you publicly withdraw, he can't force it. He'd look foolish trying to salvage the alliance. He'd have to let me go. And you'd go to Florence. Yes? Alone. A young woman, unmarried, in a foreign country. I'm not afraid of that. Elena's chin lifted. I'm afraid of dying without ever having lived. The storm chose that moment to send a blast of wind so powerful it shook the windows. Both of them turned toward the sound. In the lightning flash that followed, Rowan saw the wilderness beyond his walls, ancient and unforgiving and utterly indifferent to human plans. The bridge is gone, he said quietly. The rider brought news before sunset. The gray water took it. You can't leave. He watched the knowledge hit her, watched her face go from desperate hope to trapped panic. How long? She whispered. A week. Maybe more. It depends on how fast the waters recede and how quickly they can build a temporary crossing. A week. Elena looked around the study as if seeing her prison for the first time. I'm trapped here. With you. The man I just asked to destroy our betrothal. Yes. She started laughing, a sound edged with hysteria. This is perfect. Absolutely perfect. I ride through hell itself to escape you, and instead I'm locked in your house. My father will assume we've eloped. The scandal alone will... She stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. Oh God, the scandal! Rowan saw her working through it, saw the moment she realized what he'd already calculated. If anyone learns you were here, alone with me, overnight... He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I'm ruined. Elena's voice was hollow. Even if you refuse to marry me after this, no one else will have me. My father's rage would be nothing compared to society's judgment. An unmarried woman, unchaperoned, in a bachelor's home. It doesn't matter that I broke in. It doesn't matter that nothing happened. The appearance is enough. Yes. So you have me either way. She looked at him with something close to hatred. If you want to ensure the marriage happens, all you have to do is wait a week, and then tell anyone I was here. The pressure will be insurmountable. My father will demand an immediate wedding to salvage my reputation. Rowan felt rage stir in his chest, but not at her, at the system that trapped them both, at the rules that made her presence in his home a crime worth punishing with a forced marriage, at a world where a woman's virtue was measured in proximity to men rather than the content of her character. I could do that, he said quietly. I could use this against you. Will you? He looked at her, this brilliant, desperate, brave woman who'd risked everything for freedom, who was looking at him now not with hope but with the grim expectation of betrayal. Rowan made a decision that surprised him even as he spoke it. No, he said. I won't. Elena blinked. What? I won't use this against you. I won't tell anyone you were here, and I won't force you into a marriage you don't want. He moved to the window, looking out at the storm. But I also can't cancel the engagement, not without destroying the grain contracts that keep my people fed. So we're both trapped, just in different ways. Silence fell between them. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was very small. Then what do we do? We survive the week. Rowan turned back to her. You're injured and exhausted. You need rest, medical attention, and dry clothes. In the morning, we'll figure out the rest. But tonight, he pulled the bell cord that would summon Mrs. Graves. Tonight, you're a guest who arrived before the bridge collapsed. A distant cousin seeking shelter from the storm. Nothing more. Why would you lie for me? Because you were brave enough to ride through a killer storm for freedom. Rowan's voice was rough. The least I can do is make sure that bravery doesn't destroy you. Elena stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive each other for a week. Mrs. Graves arrived then, a stout woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts. She took in the scene with one sweeping glance. The broken window, the bleeding woman, the Duke standing too close. Mrs. Graves, Rowan said with perfect aristocratic calm, this is my distant cousin, Miss Elena Thornwood. She arrived seeking shelter just before the bridge collapsed. She's had a fall and needs medical attention and a room prepared. The housekeeper's expression said she believed not one word of this, but she'd served the Blackthorn family for 40 years. She knew when to ask questions and when to obey. Of course, Your Grace, Miss Thornwood, if you'll come with me. Elena started to stand, swayed, and would have fallen if Rowan hadn't caught her. For a moment they stood close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her gray eyes, could smell rain and roses in her hair. Steady, he murmured. I'm fine, she lied. Mrs. Graves moved forward, taking Elena's weight with practiced efficiency. Lord, child, you're frozen solid. Come on then. Hot bath and warm bed for you. We'll have you sorted by morning. As they moved toward the door, Elena looked back at Rowan. In her eyes was a question that made his chest tight. Sleep, he said. Tomorrow we'll talk. Then they were gone, and Rowan was alone with the storm, and a truth he couldn't escape. The woman he was supposed to marry had just risked her life to escape him, and instead of being insulted, he'd never been more intrigued by anyone in his life. The night passed slowly. Rowan didn't sleep. He He stood at his study window, watching the storm rage, thinking about gray eyes and desperate courage, about a woman who loved plants enough to risk everything, about a life he'd accepted without question, suddenly feeling like a cage he'd built for himself. At dawn, the storm finally broke. Pale light crept across the devastated landscape, revealing the scale of destruction. Trees down everywhere, the river swollen and murderous. And yes, the bridge gone, reduced to splinters scattered across the churning water. They were truly isolated now. Rowan dressed carefully, armoring himself in ducal formality. Then he went to find his unexpected guest. He found her in the conservatory. He shouldn't have been surprised. The conservatory had been his mother's pride, a glass cathedral filled with exotic plants from across the empire. After her death, his father had locked it away, unable to bear the reminder of her joy. Rowan had left it sealed for years, unable to bear the reminder of his father's grief. But now the door stood open, and inside, surrounded by neglected plants and dusty glass, stood Elena. She was wearing one of the housekeeper's spare dresses, simple brown wool that should have been plain but somehow made her look like a painting. Her dark hair was braided down her back. The cut on her hand was bandaged. She was holding a dried flower specimen up to the morning light, her expression one of absolute concentration. "This was a phalaenopsis," she said without turning around. "A moth orchid. Someone cared for these plants once, really cared. You can see it in the varieties chosen, not just the showy ones, but the difficult ones, the specimens that require devotion." Rowan stepped inside. The conservatory smelled of earth and memory. "My mother." Elena turned. In daylight, she was even more striking than she'd been by firelight, all sharp intelligence and carefully contained passion. She had excellent taste, Elena said. "These could be salvaged, most of them. With proper care and attention, this place could bloom again." "Why would you want to salvage my mother's garden when you're trying to escape becoming my wife?" The question came out harsher than intended. Elena flinched, but held her ground. "Because beauty doesn't deserve to die just because the person who created it is gone," she said. "And because I can't help myself. Show me dying plants, and I have to try to save them. It's a compulsion. Like riding through storms." "Exactly like that." She set down the orchid specimen with careful reverence. "Your housekeeper told me the bridge won't be passable for at least a week, maybe 10 days. "Yes. So we're prisoners together." "Temporarily." Elena moved through the conservatory, trailing her fingers across dusty glass and neglected pots. "I've been thinking about what you said, about not being able to cancel the engagement without destroying the grain contracts. And I think you're right, which means I have two choices." She stopped, turned to face him. "I can spend this week hating you for being another man who won't help me, or I can spend it understanding why." Rowan felt something shift in his chest. "Understanding? I've spent so long fighting my cage that I forgot other people have their own." Elena's voice was quiet. "You're trapped too, aren't you? By duty, by responsibility, by the weight of all those people depending on you to make the right political choice, even if it costs you everything." "Yes." The admission felt like bleeding. "Then maybe we could use this week to—" She trailed off, searching for words. "To be honest with each other. We're going to be married in 3 weeks, whether either of us wants it or not. We can go into that prison as strangers who resent each other, or we can at least try to be allies." Rowan studied her. This woman who'd broken into his house, bled on his sofa, and was now offering him an olive branch despite every reason to despise him. "What would being allies look like?" he asked. Elena's smile was small and sad and brave. "I don't know. I've never tried to befriend my jailer before, but I suppose we could start by being honest about what we're each giving up. You tell me what duty cost you. I'll tell you what freedom would have meant, and maybe by the end of this week we'll both understand the cage we're building together." The morning light fell through the dusty glass, turning her dark hair to fire. Rowan made another decision that surprised him. "All right," he said. "Allies. For a week, starting with honesty." "Honesty?" Elena echoed. Then, her eyes sharp. "Fine. Tell me this then. Do you want to marry me? Really want to, I mean, not because of duty or politics, because of me. The question was a knife. Rowan could have lied, could have said something diplomatic. Instead, he chose the brutal truth she'd asked for. I don't know you well enough to want you, he said. I know your name, your father's title, and the strategic value of an alliance with your family. That's all. But I don't not want you either. You're not a person to me yet. You're a position on a chessboard, a move I have to make to protect my people. He watched hurt flash across her face, followed by something else. Respect. Thank you, she said, for not lying to make me feel better. Your turn. Do you hate me? Elena considered the question with the same careful attention she'd given the orchid specimen. No, she said finally. I thought I would. I spent the whole ride here preparing to hate you, but you're not what I expected. You're trapped too. I can see it now, so no. I don't hate you. I hate what you represent. I hate the future you're offering. But you, personally? She shook her head. I think you might be the only honest man I've met in a very long time. Something warm unfurled in Rowan's chest. Then we have a week to figure out if honesty is enough, he said. Elena held out her bandaged hand. Allies? Rowan took it. Her grip was firm despite the injury. Allies, he agreed. Neither of them knew it yet, but that handshake, offered in a forgotten conservatory, surrounded by dying plants and morning light, was the moment everything changed. The storm had passed, but the real tempest was just beginning. The alliance lasted exactly 4 hours before their first real fight. It happened in the library, the same room where Elena had shattered the window climbing in. Mrs. Graves had already replaced the glass, but evidence of the break-in remained. Scratches on the frame, a stain on the rug from Elena's muddy clothes. Rowan had asked her to join him there after breakfast to discuss the practicalities of their situation. She arrived carrying her portfolio and wearing an expression of wary determination. Before we begin, Elena said, settling into the chair across from his desk, I need to know something. When the bridge is repaired and I can leave, will you still expect me to return in 3 weeks for the engagement ball? Rowan had known this question was coming. He'd spent the morning preparing his answer, rehearsing diplomatic phrasings that might soften the blow. He abandoned all of them. Yes, he said simply. Elena's face went very still. Even knowing what I want, what I'm giving up? Even knowing that, Rowan leaned forward, forcing himself to meet her eyes. I understand this isn't what you want, but breaking the engagement would trigger a political crisis that would cost lives, real lives. Farmers who depend on your father's grain contracts, soldiers who need the military support his allies provide, children who would go hungry if, I know the arithmetic. Elena's voice cracked like a whip. Do you think I haven't done the calculations? That I haven't lain awake every night weighing my freedom against other people's survival? She stood abruptly, began pacing the way he'd seen him do. I know exactly what canceling this engagement would cost. I know I'm being selfish. But what you don't seem to understand is that I'm drowning, and you're asking me to drown quietly so others can breathe. That's not fair. Fair? Elena whirled on him. Nothing about this is fair. You get to be the noble duke making hard choices for his people. You get to sacrifice me on the altar of your responsibility and call it honor. But I'm the one who loses everything. My work, my future, my identity, all of it gone so you can play the hero. Rowan felt his own temper rising, a rare thing, carefully controlled. You think this is easy for me? You think I want to force you into this? I think you've made your choice clear. Your people matter more than I do. They're not just my people. They'll be yours too. He was on his feet now, matching her intensity. You'll be their duchess. Their lives will be your responsibility as much as mine. A responsibility I never asked for. Neither did I. The words exploded out of him. You think I chose this life? I was born into it. My father spent his entire existence drilling duty into me until there was nothing else left. Every decision I make is measured against the welfare of thousands of people I'll never meet, but am sworn to protect. So forgive me if I can't prioritize one woman's artistic dreams over mass starvation. The silence that followed was vicious. Elena stood frozen, her chest heaving. Rowan felt his heart hammering against his ribs. They stared at each other across a distance that suddenly felt like miles. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "One woman's artistic dreams," she repeated. "That's what you think this is? A hobby? A whim?" I didn't mean, yes, you did. She moved to the desk, opened her portfolio with shaking hands. "Look at this. Really look." She pulled out a drawing, not one of the flowers from before, but something else. A landscape. A garden bursting with species Rowan didn't recognize, each one labeled with precise scientific notation. At the bottom, in elegant script, "Proposed Botanical Research Garden, Whitlock Estate, designed to preserve endangered native species and provide medicinal herbs for local healers." "This was my proposal to my father 3 years ago," Elena said. "Not a dream, a plan. A way to use our land productively while contributing to scientific knowledge. He called it a waste of resources and forbade me from pursuing it. This," she pulled out another drawing, then another, "was going to be a comprehensive field guide to medicinal plants of the Northern Territories. Free distribution to village healers who can't afford formal training. And this was a series of educational illustrations for the Royal Botanical Society's new children's literacy program." She spread them across the desk like evidence at a trial. "So yes," she continued, her voice breaking, "it's one woman's artistic dreams, but it's also research that could save lives, education that could lift communities, conservation that could preserve species from extinction. My work isn't decoration, it's documentation. It's legacy, and you're asking me to give it up as if it means nothing." Rowan stared at the drawings, at the careful notations, the scientific rigor, the obvious passion in every line. He'd been wrong, catastrophically wrong. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't understand." "No, you didn't." Elena began gathering the drawings with sharp, angry movements. "And why would you? I'm just the commodity you're trading for grain contracts. That's not—" Rowan stopped, took a breath, started again. "You're right. I reduced you to a political necessity because it was easier than seeing you as a person. That was cowardice on my part." Elena paused, her hand still on the portfolio. "At least you admit it." "I do. And I'm sorry, truly." He moved around the desk, maintaining respectful distance but no longer hiding behind furniture. "Show me the rest." "What?" "Your work. All of it. If I'm asking you to sacrifice this, the least I can do is understand what I'm asking you to give up." Elena studied him with those storm-gray eyes, searching for deception. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, because slowly, carefully, she opened the portfolio again. For the next 2 hours, she showed him everything. Not just the drawings, but the research behind them, the field journals documenting her observations, the correspondence with botanists across Europe, the meticulous notes on cultivation techniques and crossbreeding experiments. She'd been doing this work for 7 years since she was 16, teaching herself through books when formal education was denied her, conducting experiments in secret when her father forbade her laboratory, building a body of knowledge that would have earned any man a university position. Instead, she'd been told to prepare for marriage. "This species here," Elena said, pointing to a delicate blue flower in one of her drawings, "is Gentiana acaulis, trumpet gentian. It only grows above certain elevations and has very specific soil requirements. I spent an entire summer in the mountains documenting it because local healers told me it was disappearing. They use it for digestive ailments, but they're having to travel farther every year to find it. I was developing a cultivation method that could allow them to grow it in their own gardens." "Was?" Rowan asked. "My father found my experimental plots and had them destroyed. He said I was embarrassing the family by playing in the dirt like a peasant." Her voice was flat, but her hands trembled. "That was the day I first wrote to Giuliana Rossi. I was desperate. I thought if someone respected in the field vouched for my work, my father might relent." "And she offered you the apprenticeship." 6 months later. She said my observations on highland flora were the most detailed she'd seen from someone without formal training. She said I had a gift. She said, Elena's voice cracked. She said I deserved a chance to develop it. Rowan felt something painful twist in his chest. "When does the apprenticeship start?" "It started 2 weeks ago." The admission came out barely above a whisper. Juliana held the position as long as she could, but she needed to replace me. I received the letter 3 days before I rode here. She'd found another student, someone whose family supported their work, someone who could actually accept the opportunity. Elena, I lost it. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were too bright. The one chance I had to be more than an ornament in someone's house, and it's gone. So you'll forgive me if I don't handle this situation with perfect grace. I'm watching my entire future disappear while everyone tells me I should be grateful for the privilege of being sold to a stranger. The words hit Rowan like physical blows, because she was right. Every word was right, and he was complicit in the system that had destroyed her dreams. He did something then that surprised them both. He took her bandaged hand, carefully, giving her time to pull away, and said 4 words he'd never said to anyone in his life. Help me understand better. Elena blinked. What? I've spent my whole life accepting duty without questioning the cost. But you're right, I don't understand what I'm asking you to sacrifice. So help me understand. Teach me about your work. Show me why it matters. He gestured toward the conservatory visible through the library windows. You said those plants could be salvaged. Show me how. Why? Elena's voice was suspicious. So you can feel less guilty about destroying my future? No, so I can stop being ignorant about what botanical research actually means. And maybe, he hesitated, then committed, so we can find a way for you to continue some version of it, even after we're married. Elena pulled her hand back. You can't possibly mean that. I don't know what's possible yet, but I know that complete destruction of your work isn't the only option. Maybe there's a middle path. There isn't. Elena's laugh was bitter. I've looked. Trust me. Being a duchess isn't compatible with being a scientist. Society won't accept it. Your peers will mock you, and no one will take my work seriously once I'm seen as a rich woman's hobby rather than legitimate research. Then we change what society accepts. Elena stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. You can't just change society because you feel guilty about one woman's situation. Watch me. The words came out with such calm certainty that Elena actually stepped back. Rowan felt that same certainty settle into his bones. He'd spent his whole life following rules he'd never questioned. Maybe it was time to question them. I'm serious, he continued. If we're going to be trapped in this marriage, we might as well make it serve some purpose beyond politics. You want to continue your research? Fine. We'll build you a proper laboratory, fund your field studies, support publication of your work under your own name. Rowan, I know it's not the same as Florence. I know it's not the freedom you wanted, but it's better than complete burial. And maybe, he met her eyes, it's the beginning of something neither of us has considered. A partnership instead of a prison. Elena looked at him for a long moment. He could see her brilliant mind working, analyzing, testing his words for weakness or deception. Finally, she spoke. Show me the conservatory we saw, she said. If you're serious about this, about letting me continue my work, then prove it. Help me restore your mother's garden. If you can handle getting your hands dirty for a week, maybe I'll believe the rest isn't just pretty words. Rowan felt a smile tug at his lips, the first genuine one in longer than he could remember. Deal, he said, but I warn you, I know nothing about plants. Good, Elena replied, and there was a glint in her eyes that looked almost like challenge. Then you'll follow my instructions exactly, even if they seem strange. Even then. We'll see, Elena said. But she was almost smiling too. That's how it began. Not with grand gestures or romantic declarations, but with 2 people covered in dirt and arguing about root systems. The conservatory became their shared territory over the next several days. Elena threw herself into the restoration work with fierce focus, while Rowan discovered he had a talent for following complex instructions and hauling heavy pots. They worked from dawn until dusk, speaking little at first, communicating mostly through gestures and curt directions. But slowly, things shifted. On the 3rd day, Elena explained the propagation technique she was using to save a dying jasmine, and Rowan found himself fascinated by the precision of it, the way she treated each cutting like a patient in surgery, carefully removing diseased tissue and sealing wounds with practiced efficiency. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, watching her work. "Books, mostly, and experimentation, trial and error." Elena made a precise cut, her bandaged hand steady despite the injury. "I killed a lot of plants learning what works and what doesn't. That's why my father hated my hobby so much. He saw it as waste. I saw it as education." "It's not waste if you learn from failure." Elena glanced up at him, surprised. "That's what I always thought, but everyone else just saw dead plants and ruined resources." "Then everyone else was short-sighted." Rowan passed her the rooting compound she'd mixed earlier. "Scientific advancement requires experimentation. Even military strategy is just disciplined trial and error." Something shifted in Elena's expression, a softening Rowan was beginning to recognize as the moment she decided to trust him slightly more. "My mother understood that," she said quietly, returning to her work. "Before she died, she used to help me with my experiments. She'd cover for me when my father asked where I was. She said," Elena's voice caught, "she said that just because I was born female didn't mean I should be denied curiosity. That knowledge was the one thing no man could take from me once I possessed it." "She sounds remarkable." "She was. And then she was gone, and there was no one left to protect my work from my father's disapproval." Elena's hand stilled. "That's when I started hiding it, pretending I'd given up, conducting my research in secret. It's exhausting, living like that, always hiding the thing that makes you feel most alive." Rowan thought about his own carefully controlled life, about the parts of himself he'd learned to hide because his father considered them weakness, compassion, doubt, the desire for something beyond duty. "I understand that more than you know," he said. Elena looked at him then, really looked, and Rowan felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with physical vulnerability. "What do you hide?" she asked. The question should have felt invasive. Instead, it felt like permission. "Grief," Rowan said. "Doubt. The fear that I'm not actually capable of protecting all the people who depend on me. My father taught me that showing weakness was the same as being weak, so I learned not to show anything at all." "That sounds lonely." "It is." They worked in silence for a while after that. But it was a different kind of silence, not empty, but full of shared understanding. On the fourth day, they had their second fight. Elena wanted to reorganize the entire plant placement based on light requirements and botanical families. Rowan thought they should preserve his mother's original arrangement out of respect for her memory. "Your mother's arrangement is beautiful," Elena argued, gesturing at the chaotic mix of species. "But half these plants are dying because they're in the wrong environment. The orchids need humidity. The succulents need sun. You can't just group things by aesthetic appeal and expect them to survive." "This was important to her," Rowan countered. "Changing it feels like erasing her." "No, letting it die is erasing her." Elena's voice softened slightly. "I'm trying to honor what she built by making it sustainable. That's not erasure. That's evolution." They glared at each other across a table of dying plants. Then Rowan, surprising himself, laughed. "What?" Elena demanded. "We're arguing about my dead mother's garden arrangement like it's a military campaign." Elena's lips twitched. "You started it by being unreasonable about the succulents." "The succulents are fine where they are." "They're rotting from overwatering. Then we'll water them less. That's not how grouped plantings work." They were both grinning now, the absurdity of the argument breaking through their tension. Rowan felt something warm unfurl in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but something close, something possible. "Fine," he said. "Reorganize them. But show me why each change matters. I want to understand the logic." Elena's smile turned triumphant. "Deal. And I promise, when we're done, it'll be more beautiful than before, just in a different way." She was right. By the end of the day, the conservatory had been transformed. Plants were grouped by environmental needs, creating distinct zones of tropical humidity, arid desert, and temperate forest. It shouldn't have worked aesthetically, but somehow it did, each section flowing into the next like movements in a symphony. "It's remarkable," Rowan said, surveying their work. "It's functional," Elena corrected. but she was pleased. He could see it in the way she touched the leaves of the newly arranged plants, checking their response to the changes. "Can I ask you something?" Rowan said. Elena nodded, not looking up from her inspection. "Why plants? Of all the things you could have studied, why this?" Elena was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with memory. "When I was 8, my mother took me to the Royal Botanical Gardens. There was a lily there, Victoria amazonica, the giant water lily. The leaves were wider than I was tall, and they were strong enough to hold my weight. The gardener let me sit on one. I remember floating there on the water, surrounded by these enormous green leaves and white flowers the size of my head. And I thought," she smiled at the memory, "I thought this was magic, real magic, the kind that exists in the actual world." "And you've been chasing that magic ever since?" "Yes. Because most of the world told me magic didn't exist, that I should focus on practical things like embroidery and household management. But plants were proof they were wrong. Every seed that sprouted, every flower that bloomed, it was evidence that miracles were real and scientifically explicable at the same time." Rowan felt something crack in the armor around his heart. "I don't want to take that from you." Elena finally looked at him. "Then don't. I don't know how to give you what you really want. Freedom, Florence, the life you planned. But I can give you this." He gestured at the conservatory. "And more. Resources, support, a platform for your work. It's not enough, I know it's not, but it's what I can offer." Elena crossed to where he stood. They were close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her face, the hope fighting with cynicism in her eyes. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care? Really? Is it just guilt?" Rowan considered lying, considered offering some diplomatic non-answer that would keep things simple. Instead, he chose honesty. "Because watching you work makes me remember that passion exists," he said. "I've spent so long being dutiful that I forgot what it looks like when someone cares about something deeply enough to risk everything for it. You remind me that there's more to life than obligation, and I—" He hesitated, then pushed through, "I don't want to be the person who extinguishes that fire." Elena's breath caught. For a moment, they just stood there, surrounded by the plants they'd saved together, the air thick with possibility. Then the door crashed open. They sprang apart as Mrs. Graves burst in, her face pale with alarm. "Your Grace, Miss Elena, there are riders approaching, 3 of them. They've crossed the river on horseback. One of them is carrying the Whitlock family banner." Rowan felt his blood go cold. "Elena's father." "He can't be here," Elena whispered. "The bridge is impassable. How—" "Determined men find ways." Mrs. Graves wrung her hands. "They'll reach the house in less than an hour. What should I tell the staff?" Rowan's mind raced. Lord Whitlock here, days ahead of schedule, which meant he'd heard about Elena's disappearance and come looking for her. If he found her here, unchaperoned, the scandal would force an immediate wedding. The careful alliance they'd been building, the fragile partnership based on honesty and mutual respect, would be destroyed by social pressure and her father's rage. "Miss Elena is still officially your cousin," Mrs. Graves said carefully. "That's the story we've maintained with the staff, but Lord Whitlock will know his own daughter." "He can't see me," Elena interrupted. Her voice was shaking but clear. "If he finds me here, he'll use it to force the marriage immediately. No negotiation, no compromise, just—" She swallowed hard. "Just ownership." Rowan felt rage surge through him. The thought of Elena's brilliant mind being crushed under her father's authoritarian control made him want to break things. "Then he won't see you," Rowan said. "Where can I hide? The house isn't that large, and he'll search—" "The North Tower." Rowan was already moving, his strategic mind clicking into operation. "It's been closed for years, structurally unsound according to official records. No one goes there. I'll tell him you never arrived, that the storm must have prevented your journey. He won't believe you. He doesn't have to believe me. He just has to accept that he can't prove otherwise." Rowan turned to Mrs. Graves. "Prepare the North Tower. Food, water, blankets. Everything Miss Elena needs to stay comfortable for however long this takes." "But your Grace—" "Now, Mrs. Graves." The housekeeper fled. Rowan turned to Elena, who looked terrified and furious in equal measure. "I hate hiding," she said. "I know. I hate that he still has this power over me. I know that too. Elena's hands curled into fists. When this is over, when he's gone and the bridge is repaired, I'm leaving. I'm going back to my father's estate and I'm going to fight him. Really fight him. I'm done being controlled. Rowan felt his heart twist, because he knew what she wasn't saying, that she was including him in the list of men trying to control her future. Elena, don't, she held up a hand, don't make promises you can't keep. You've been kind this week. You've shown me more respect than most men in my life, but you're still going to expect me at that engagement ball in 3 weeks. You're still going to marry me whether I want it or not. So let's not pretend this partnership is anything more than making the best of a bad situation. The words hit like artillery fire. Rowan wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but she wasn't wrong. Not really. He was still trapped by the same obligations that had always trapped him. Go, he said quietly. Mrs. Graves will take you to the tower. I'll handle your father. Elena nodded sharply, turned to leave, then stopped. Rowan? Yes? Thank you for hiding me, for giving me this choice, even if it's just temporary. Then she was gone, leaving Rowan alone in the conservatory they'd built together. He had 45 minutes to prepare before Lord Whitlock arrived. He used them to transform himself back into the cold, controlled Duke of Thornmere, the man who felt nothing, showed nothing, gave nothing away. When the riders finally reached the gates, Rowan was waiting on the front steps, every inch the aristocratic lord receiving unexpected guests. Lord Whitlock dismounted with the graceless urgency of a man who'd ridden hard for days. He was a bull of a man, thick-necked, red-faced, dressed in riding clothes still soaked from crossing the river. His eyes swept the house with predatory assessment. "Where is she?" he demanded without preamble. "Lord Whitlock." Rowan's voice was ice. What an unexpected visit. "Don't play games with me, Blackthorn. My daughter disappeared 4 days ago. Her horse returned without her. The last person to see her said she was riding north." Whitlock advanced up the steps. "North, toward your estate. So I'll ask again. Where is Elena?" Rowan held his ground. "I haven't seen your daughter. You're lying." "I don't lie, Lord Whitlock. It's beneath me." Rowan let contempt color his tone. "Your daughter is not here. She never arrived. If she truly was riding north during that storm, then I fear she may have been caught in it before reaching safety." He watched the words hit, watched Whitlock's face cycle through rage to fear to renewed suspicion. "You expect me to believe my daughter vanished into thin air? I expect you to believe the evidence. The bridge was destroyed 3 days ago. Communication has been impossible. If Elena was traveling and was caught in the storm..." Rowan let the implication hang heavy. "No." Whitlock's voice shook. "No, she's clever. She would have found shelter. His eyes narrowed. "Let me search your house." "Absolutely not. I have the right..." "You have no rights here." Rowan's voice could have frozen fire. "This is my land, my house, and I'm not permitting you to violate my hospitality with baseless accusations. If you believe Elena is in danger, then gather your men and search the countryside. But you will not search my home based on paranoid speculation." For a moment, he thought Whitlock might actually attack him. The older man's fists clenched, his face went purple with rage. Then, surprisingly, he deflated. "She was angry," Whitlock said quietly, "about the engagement. She begged me to cancel it. I refused. We argued. She said..." His voice cracked. "She said she'd rather die than marry you. I thought it was just her usual dramatics. But what if she meant it? What if she did something foolish?" Rowan felt an unexpected stab of sympathy. Whitlock might be a controlling father, but he clearly loved his daughter in his own twisted way. "Elena is resourceful," Rowan said, gentling his tone slightly. "If she survived the initial storm, she'll have found shelter somewhere. Have you checked the villages between here and your estate?" "We stopped at 2. No one had seen her." "Then search the rest, and the farmhouses, the old hunting lodges, any structure that could provide refuge." Rowan gestured to his steward, who'd been hovering nearby. "Thomas will provide you with maps of the area and a list of potential shelters. You're welcome to rest here tonight and resume the search at first light." It was a calculated risk. Keeping Whitlock in the house meant greater danger of discovery, But sending him away immediately would seem suspicious. Better to offer grudging hospitality and maintain the facade of cooperation. Whitlock studied him with eyes that missed nothing. You really haven't seen her? I have not. But you'll marry her? When she's found? The question felt like a trap. Rowan chose his words carefully. That depends on whether Elena wishes to marry me, he said. I'm not in the habit of forcing women into unwanted marriages. Whitlock's laugh was harsh. How noble! But nobility doesn't feed kingdoms, does it? The alliance stands regardless of what my daughter wishes. She'll learn to accept duty. They all do eventually. Rowan felt disgust curl in his stomach. This was the man who'd crushed Elena's spirit, destroyed her research, reduced her brilliant mind to a commodity. We'll see, Rowan said neutrally. In the meantime, you're welcome to use our resources for the search. I'll have rooms prepared. He turned to go, but Whitlock's voice stopped him. Blackthorn? If you're hiding her, if you've compromised her in any way, I'll destroy you. Alliance be damned. Do you understand? Rowan looked back over his shoulder. Let all his aristocratic disdain show. Threats are the tools of weak men, Whitlock. I expected better from you. Then he walked inside, leaving Elena's father fuming on the steps. The house felt like a powder keg for the next 3 days. Whitlock and his men used Thornmere as a base while they searched every village, farmhouse, and cave within riding distance. Rowan maintained perfect hospitality while quietly ensuring that no one went near the North Tower. He had food and supplies smuggled up to Elena under cover of darkness, using passages his mother had shown him as a child. On the second night, he risked visiting her himself. The North Tower was exactly as he remembered: crumbling stone, narrow stairs, rooms filled with dust and memory. He found Elena in what had once been a lady's sitting room, surrounded by her drawings, working by candlelight. She looked up when he entered, her face haggard with stress. Is he gone? She asked. Not yet. They're searching the eastern villages tomorrow. Elena set down her pencil. He thinks I'm dead, doesn't he? That's the only reason he'd still be here. He's afraid. In his own way, I think he loves you. Love that requires obedience isn't love. It's ownership. Elena's voice was flat. How much longer can I hide here? As long as necessary. And when he eventually gives up and leaves, what then? I can't stay in this tower forever. Rowan crossed to where she sat, careful to maintain respectful distance. When he leaves, we talk, really talk, about what you want and what's possible and how to build something that doesn't destroy you in the process. Elena looked at him with eyes that held too much pain. You still don't understand. There is no version of this that doesn't destroy me. Your noble compromise, letting me continue my research while being your duchess, it won't work. Society won't accept it. Your peers will mock you, and I'll be reduced to the eccentric duchess with her little hobby, never taken seriously, never truly free. Then we change society. You can't just watch me. Rowan surprised himself with the intensity in his voice. I've spent this week watching you work, watching you save plants that everyone else had written off as dead. You don't accept impossible. Why should I? Elena stood, moved to the window. Below, torchlight marked where Whitlock's men were returning from another fruitless search. What are you proposing? She asked quietly. Rowan made a decision that would change everything. 6 months, he said. Elena turned. What? After the engagement is formally announced, after the political alliance is secure, I'll give you 6 months. 6 months to go to Florence, to study with Giuliano Rossi, to pursue your work without interference. Then you come back and we get married. But you return as an established artist, someone whose work has been recognized by the European botanical community. It'll be harder for society to dismiss you then. Elena stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. The scandal alone would what? Shock people? Good. Let them be shocked. Rowan felt something fierce rising in his chest. I'm tired of living according to rules designed to make weak men feel powerful. If giving you 6 months of freedom means society gossips about the eccentric Duke of Thornmere, so be it. But the alliance? Will hold because the engagement will be official. Your father gets what he wants, our family's united. I get what I need, the political stability. And you get what you deserve, a chance to be more than someone's wife. Elena's eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. Why would you do this? Because the alternative is watching your fire die. And I... Rowan stopped, stunned by the truth of what he was about to say. I can't bear the thought of that. The moment stretched between them, fragile and enormous. Then footsteps sounded on the stairs below. Heavy, quick, purposeful. Both of them froze. Your Grace? It was Thomas, the steward, his voice urgent. Your Grace, are you up there? Rowan moved to the door. What is it? It's Lord Whitlock, sir. He's collapsed. His heart, the doctor thinks. He's calling for his daughter. Rowan felt the floor drop out from under him. He turned to Elena, saw his own shock reflected in her face. He's dying, she whispered. And suddenly, hiding was no longer an option. Elena was already moving before Rowan could stop her. She pushed past him, her feet flying down the tower stairs with reckless speed. Rowan caught up to her on the third landing, grabbed her arm. Wait, think about this. My father is dying, Elena's voice cracked. I don't have time to think. If you go down there, everyone will know you've been here, hidden. The scandal will... I don't care about the scandal. She wrenched free, her eyes blazing. Let them gossip. Let them judge. He's my father, and whatever he's done, I won't let him die alone thinking I'm dead because of him. She was running again. Rowan followed, his mind racing through consequences and calculations, even as his feet carried him down the ancient stairs. By the time they reached the main floor, half the household had gathered outside the guest wing. Servants whispered in corners. Whitlock's men stood in tight, worried clusters. The doctor, a local physician Rowan had summoned when Whitlock first arrived, emerged from the sick room with blood on his sleeves and defeat in his eyes. How is he? Rowan demanded. The doctor shook his head. His heart is failing. The stress of the search, the hard riding, it was too much. He has hours at most. He's asking for his daughter, but he's barely coherent. Elena didn't wait for permission. She shouldered through the crowd and into the room. Rowan followed her across the threshold and stopped, struck by the sight before him. Lord Whitlock lay in the four-poster bed, looking 20 years older than he had 3 days ago. His face was gray, his breathing shallow and labored. Sweat soaked through the nightshirt someone had dressed him in. His eyes were closed, but his lips moved constantly, forming words no one could hear. Papa? Elena's voice broke on the word. Whitlock's eyes snapped open. For a moment he stared at her as if she were a ghost. Then understanding dawned, followed immediately by rage so pure it seemed to give him strength. You! He gasped. You were here, the whole time. Papa, please! Hiding like a coward while He dissolved into coughing that brought up blood. The doctor rushed forward, but Whitlock waved him away with surprising violence. While I tore this countryside apart, thinking you were dead. I'm sorry. Sorry? Whitlock's laugh was terrible. You're sorry? You let me believe. You let me think. Another fit of coughing. More blood. Elena reached for him, but he recoiled. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me after what you've done. Elena's face went white. Rowan saw her sway and moved instinctively to steady her, his hand on her shoulder. It was the worst thing he could have done. Whitlock's eyes locked on the gesture, on Rowan's hand touching his daughter with casual familiarity, on Elena's lack of surprise at the contact, on the intimacy implied by that simple moment of support. How long? Whitlock whispered. What? Elena said. How long have you been hiding here with him? Days? A week? His voice gained terrible strength. Unchaperoned, alone together. Tell me, daughter, are you still marriageable, or have you ruined yourself completely? The accusation hung in the air like poison. Elena pulled away from Rowan's touch as if burned. Nothing happened. Liar! Whitlock tried to sit up, failed, collapsed back against the pillows. You think I'm a fool? You disappear. You hide in his house. And I'm supposed to believe he kept his hands to himself? That you kept your virtue? Lord Whitlock, Rowan interjected, his voice cold as winter, you will not speak to your daughter that way. I'll speak to her however I please. She's disgraced herself, disgraced our family. She saved herself from a storm that killed 3 men last winter. She survived when she should have died. And yes, she sought shelter in my home because there was nowhere else to go. That's not disgrace, that's survival. Whitlock's eyes shifted to Rowan, calculating even through dying. You're protecting her. Why? What did she offer you in exchange for your silence? Rowan felt rage ignite in his chest. I'm protecting her because it's the decent thing to do, because she deserves better than being treated like property, and because, unlike you, I actually care about what she wants. What she wants? Whitlock's laugh devolved into more coughing. What she wants is irrelevant. She's a woman. Her purpose is to marry well and produce heirs. That's all she's good for. That's not true, Elena said quietly. Isn't it? Look at you. 23 years old and still playing with flowers like a child. If your mother hadn't filled your head with nonsense about education and purpose, don't! Elena's voice was steel. Don't you dare blame Mama for teaching me I could be more than decorative. More than decorative? You? Whitlock's contempt was vicious. You're barely even that. Plain face, difficult temperament, obsessed with dirt and plants. I had to bribe Blackthorn's father just to get him to consider the match. Do you know what I promised? What it cost me to secure you a husband with a title. Rowan saw Elena flinch as if struck, saw the words hit her like physical blows. That's enough, Rowan said. It's not nearly enough. Whitlock was fading now, his voice weakening but his venom undiluted. She was supposed to be grateful, obedient. Instead, she runs wild, embarrasses me at every turn, and now she's ruined herself and destroyed the one alliance that could have salvaged our family's position. The alliance stands, Rowan said firmly. Both Whitlocks turned to stare at him. What? Elena whispered. The alliance stands, Rowan repeated. I still intend to marry Elena. Her presence here changes nothing. You can't possibly, Whitlock began. I can and I will. The engagement will be formally announced as planned. No scandal, no disgrace, just a betrothal between our families exactly as we negotiated. Elena was shaking her head. Rowan, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He met her eyes, willed her to understand, because it's the right thing to do, and because I want to. Whitlock made a sound that might have been a laugh or a death rattle. How noble! The Duke sacrificing himself for damaged goods. But tell me, Blackthorn, when she disappoints you, when her strange obsessions and difficult nature make you regret this decision, will you still be so magnanimous? Elena doesn't disappoint me, Rowan said quietly. She challenges me. She makes me question assumptions I've held my entire life. And she's the most remarkable woman I've ever met. So yes, I'll marry her. But not because I'm sacrificing myself, because I'm lucky enough that she might actually say yes. The room went absolutely silent. Elena stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. Whitlock's breathing had gone shallow and rapid. The doctor hovered nervously by the door. Then Whitlock laughed, a wet, ugly sound. She won't say yes, he rasped. She'll run the moment she gets the chance. That's what she does. She runs from responsibility, from duty, from anything that requires her to be less than the center of attention. His eyes found Elena's. You're a coward, just like I've always said. Something changed in Elena's face. Something hardened. You're right, she said. Whitlock blinked. What? I am a coward. I ran from the engagement. I ran from you. I've spent my whole life running from everything that scared me. Elena's voice was steady now, clear and cold. But I'm done running. If you want to call me a coward with your dying breath, go ahead. But know this, I'm going to marry the Duke of Thornmere. I'm going to become the Duchess of Thornmere. And I'm going to use every ounce of power that title gives me to do exactly what you always forbade me from doing. Elena, Rowan started. I'm going to continue my botanical research, Elena continued, her eyes never leaving her father's face. I'm going to publish my work under my own name. I'm going to fund scientific expeditions and establish research programs and prove that a woman can be both a duchess and a scholar. Everything you said I couldn't do, everything you tried to destroy in me, I'm going to make it real, and you're going to die knowing that you failed to break me. Whitlock's face had gone purple with rage and lack of oxygen. You ungrateful! You spiteful! I'm done being grateful for scraps, Elena said. I'm done accepting that my worth is measured by my obedience, and I'm done caring what you think of me. She turned to Rowan. In her eyes was a question and a challenge and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. Did you mean it? She asked. She what? About Florence? About giving me 6 months? Rowan's heart was hammering. Every word. And you'll support my research, even when society mocks you for having an eccentric wife. Especially then. Elena took a shaking breath. Then yes, I'll marry you. Not because my father demands it, not because of political alliances or grain contracts, but because you're the first man who's ever seen me as a person instead of a problem to be solved. Behind her, Whitlock made a strangled sound of protest. Elena didn't turn around. Goodbye, Papa. I hope whatever peace you find on the other side is more generous than the love you showed me in this life. Then she walked out of the room, her head high and her hands steady. Rowan stood frozen for a moment, torn between following her and staying with the dying man. Whitlock made the decision for him. Go, the older man rasped. Go play house with my ungrateful daughter, but mark my words, Blackthorn. She'll destroy you. That's what she does. She destroys everything she touches. No, Rowan said quietly. She creates. She preserves. She brings dying things back to life. You were just too blind to see it. He left Whitlock to die alone with his bitterness. He found Elena in the conservatory, of course. She was standing among the plants they'd restored together, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Rowan approached carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal. Elena, she turned. Her face was a mess of tears and rage and relief all tangled together. I'm a terrible person, she said. What kind of daughter walks away from her dying father? The kind whose father spent years crushing her spirit? Rowan moved closer. You didn't abandon him. You freed yourself. There's a difference. Is there? Because right now it feels like I just killed whatever love might have existed between us. Elena. No, let me finish. She wiped at her eyes angrily. I need to say this before I lose my nerve. I meant what I said in there. I'll marry you, but not for the reasons everyone expects. I'll marry you because in 1 week, you've shown me more respect than my father showed me in 23 years. Because you see my work as valuable instead of embarrassing. Because when I talk about my dreams, you don't laugh. You ask questions. She took a step toward him, then another. But I need you to understand something, she continued. I'm going to be a terrible duchess. I'm going to embarrass you at dinner parties by talking about pollination instead of gossip. I'm going to spend more time in laboratories than ballrooms. I'm going to publish papers under my own name and insist on being called Dr. Whitlock instead of just Your Grace. And if that's not what you want, if you're expecting me to transform into some perfect aristocratic wife, then tell me now before we make promises we can't keep. Rowan felt something click into place in his chest, some puzzle piece he hadn't known was missing. I don't want a perfect aristocratic wife, he said. I want you, exactly as you are, dirt under your fingernails and all. Elena's laugh was half sob. You say that now, but wait until the first time I skip a state dinner because I'm documenting a rare orchid bloom. Then I'll make excuses and join you in the conservatory. What if I want to go to Florence? Really go, not just talk about it. Then I'll make arrangements for your travel and funding for your studies. What if I embarrass you? Then I'll stand beside you and dare anyone to criticize. Elena stared at him. Why? Why would you do all this? Rowan realized he was standing close enough to touch her, close enough to see the gold flecks in her gray eyes, to smell roses in her hair despite the dirt and tears. Because watching you work makes me remember what passion looks like, he said. Because your mind is the most fascinating thing I've encountered in years. Because you make me want to be better than the man my father trained me to be. He paused, then committed to the full truth. And because somewhere in the last week I stopped seeing this marriage as duty and started seeing it as privilege. Elena's breath caught. Rowan, I'm not asking you to love me, he said quickly. I know that's not what this is, but I am asking you to trust me, to believe that I'll keep my promises about Florence and your research, and building a life that doesn't destroy you. And what do you get in return? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. If I'm off studying in Italy or buried in my laboratory, what does the great Duke of Thornmere get out of this arrangement? Rowan smiled, a real smile, the kind that felt foreign after years of careful control. A partner who challenges me instead of just obeying. A wife who cares about things beyond social climbing and gossip. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, a friend who understands what it feels like to be trapped by expectations. Elena was crying again, but these tears looked different, softer somehow. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to be married to someone I actually like. Everyone I know treats marriage like a business transaction or a prison sentence. I don't have a model for what we're trying to build. Neither do I, so we'll figure it out together. We'll make mistakes and argue and probably drive each other mad, but at least we'll do it honestly. Elena nodded. Then, before Rowan could process what was happening, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It wasn't a long kiss. It wasn't even particularly skilled, more a collision of lips than anything romantic. But it was real. It was choice. And when Elena pulled back, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright, Rowan felt like he'd been struck by lightning. Sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. I needed to know if... Don't apologize. Rowan's voice came out rougher than intended. Ever. They stood there, surrounded by rescued plants and morning light. The whole world narrowed to the space between their bodies. Then reality crashed back in. Mrs. Graves appeared in the conservatory doorway, her face grave. Your Grace, Miss Elena, Lord Whitlock has passed. The word should have devastated Elena. Instead, she just nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already known. Thank you, Mrs. Graves, she said quietly. Please make arrangements for his body to be prepared for transport back to his estate, and send word to his steward that I'll be handling the funeral arrangements. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised by Elena's composure, but she simply curtsied and withdrew. Elena turned back to Rowan. I should feel something more than this. Relief and guilt and maybe a little bit of grief. But mostly I just feel empty. That's normal. Grief is complicated when the relationship was difficult. Is it still grief if what I'm mourning is the father he could have been instead of the one he was? Rowan had no answer for that. So instead he offered his hand. Elena took it. What happens now? She asked. Now we navigate the scandal, Rowan said grimly. Because Lord Whitlock's men know you were hiding here. They'll talk. The gossip will spread. By the time we return to society, everyone will have heard some version of the story. Let them talk. Elena's voice was steadier than he expected. You were right before. We can't change what happened. We can only control what happens next. And what do you want to happen next? Elena looked at him with those storm-gray eyes that had haunted him since the moment she'd appeared in his study. I want to go to Florence, she said. As soon as the funeral is over and the estate is settled. I want to take that apprenticeship with Giuliano Rossi, or whatever version of it still exists. I want 6 months to prove I can be a serious scholar, not just a duchess with a hobby. Done. And then I want to come back and marry you. Not in some huge society wedding designed to rehabilitate my reputation. A real wedding, small, honest. Just us and the promises we're actually willing to keep. Rowan felt his throat tighten. Done. And then I want to build something new. A marriage that doesn't look like anyone else's. A life that makes sense to us even if it shocks everyone else. Done, Rowan said again. Then, because he couldn't help himself, is there anything you want that I can't just agree to immediately? Elena's smile was watery but genuine. For you to stop being so accommodating. I need you to argue with me sometimes, to push back when I'm being unreasonable. If you just agree to everything, I'll never know what you actually want. Fair enough. Rowan squeezed her hand. Then here's what I want. I want you to promise that when you go to Florence, you'll write to me. Not formal letters about the weather and your health. Real letters. Tell me about your work. Share your discoveries. Let me know you're thinking of me even when we're apart. I can do that. And I want you to promise that when you come back, you'll give this marriage a real chance. Not just dutiful cohabitation, but actual partnership. I know you don't love me now, but I want the possibility left open that someday you might. Elena's eyes searched his face. And what if I do? Fall in love with you, I mean. What then? The question stole Rowan's breath, because somewhere in the last week, he'd started wondering the same thing about himself. Then I'll consider myself the luckiest man in the kingdom, he said honestly. Elena nodded slowly. All right. 6 months in Florence, then marriage, then we see what we can build together. Together, Rowan echoed. They sealed the agreement not with a kiss, but with clasped hands and steady eyes, and the kind of understanding that only came from shared honesty. They didn't know it yet, but that moment, that commitment to building something new from the ashes of expectation, would change everything. Not just for them, but for everyone watching, because the story of the runaway bride and the duke who hid her wouldn't stay secret for long. And when it exploded across society, it would force choices they weren't prepared to make. The funeral was held 3 days later at the Whitlock family estate. Elena delivered a eulogy so honest it made half the attendees weep and the other half shift uncomfortably. She spoke of a complicated man who loved control more than connection, who feared his daughter's brilliance because he couldn't understand it, who died alone because he'd pushed away everyone who might have mourned him with genuine grief. The scandal had already begun to spread by then. Whispers about Elena's mysterious disappearance. Speculation about what really happened during her week at Thornmere. Rowan stood beside her through all of it, a silent wall of aristocratic disdain for anyone brave enough to gossip in his hearing. After the funeral, Elena began settling her father's affairs. Rowan watched her transform from the desperate woman who'd broken into his study into something harder and more dangerous. A young woman with power and the willingness to use it. She fired her father's closest advisors within a week, reorganized the estate management, established a trust to fund botanical research at the university her father had forbidden her from attending. Every decision was calculated to honor the mother who'd encouraged her dreams while systematically dismantling the father who'd tried to crush them. "You're terrifying when you're angry," Rowan observed one evening, watching her work through estate documents with ruthless efficiency. Elena looked up from a contract she was revising. "Good. I've spent 23 years being underestimated. It's time people learned I'm not decorative." 2 weeks after the funeral, the letter arrived from Florence. Elena opened it at breakfast, scanned the contents, and went absolutely still. "What is it?" Rowan asked. "It's from Giuliana Rossi." Elena's voice was shaking. "She heard about my father's death. She's offering her condolences and—" Elena looked up, her eyes bright with tears. "And she's offering me the apprenticeship again. She says she always held out hope I'd find a way to accept. She's willing to take me on starting next month if I can arrange travel." Rowan felt his heart contract. Because this was it, the moment where promises became real, where he proved whether his words about supporting her dreams were genuine or just pretty lies designed to win her cooperation. "Then we arranged travel," he said simply. "Rowan, are you sure? The scandal is still fresh. If I leave now, society will assume whatever serves their need for drama. Let them." Rowan stood, moved to her side. "You have a chance to study with the finest botanical illustrator in Europe. You're not sacrificing that for gossip. But the engagement will be formally announced before you leave. We'll make it public and official. You'll go to Florence as my acknowledged fiancée, not some runaway bride. And when you return, we'll marry with society's grudging acceptance or without it. Either way works for me." Elena stared at him. "You really mean this?" "Every word." She stood so quickly her chair toppled backward. Then she was in his arms, holding him with desperate strength. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for being everything my father wasn't." Rowan held her carefully, aware that this might be the last time for months. "Write to me?" "Every week, I promise." They stood like that for a long moment, two people on the edge of something neither fully understood. Then Elena pulled back, her face transformed by determination. "I need to make arrangements, book passage, write to Giuliana, pack my research materials." She was already moving toward the door, her mind clearly racing ahead. "There's so much to do." "Elena." She stopped, turned back. "Be brilliant," Rowan said. "Show them what they almost destroyed." Elena's smile was fierce and beautiful and entirely her own. "I intend to," she said. Then she was gone, leaving Rowan alone with the realization that he'd just agreed to send away the most interesting person who'd ever entered his carefully controlled life. He should have felt relieved, should have welcomed the return to peaceful solitude. Instead, he felt like he'd just cut out his own heart and sent it to Italy. The formal engagement announcement appeared in all the major papers 2 weeks later. It caused exactly the scandal Rowan had predicted. Shocked gasps at the speed of the engagement following Lord Whitlock's death, whispered speculation about what had really happened during Elena's mysterious week at Thornmere, thinly veiled suggestions about compromised virtue and forced marriages. Rowan responded to it all with icy, aristocratic silence. Elena responded by publishing her first paper. It appeared in the Royal Botanical Society's quarterly journal under the name Elena Whitlock, Botanical Researcher, Thornmere Estate. The paper detailed her documentation of the rare Gentiana acalis and proposed a cultivation method that could save the species from local extinction. The botanical community praised it. The social community was appalled. A duchess-to-be publishing scientific research under her own name, actually contributing to academic discourse instead of just patronizing the arts? The scandal escalated from whispers to open criticism. Lady Pemberton, a society matriarch whose opinion carried terrifying weight, published a letter in the social pages declaring Elena Whitlock a cautionary tale of what happens when young women are given too much education and too little supervision. Elena's response was to publish a second paper. This one documented the medicinal properties of highland plants and was dedicated to the village healers whose traditional knowledge deserves recognition alongside formal medicine. Rowan watched the social warfare escalate with grim satisfaction. Because Elena wasn't just defending herself, she was attacking the system that had tried to destroy her. Every paper she published was proof that women could contribute meaningfully to science. Every acknowledgement she gave to common healers was a challenge to aristocratic assumptions about who deserved credit for knowledge. The aristocracy was furious. The academic community was fascinated. And Rowan found himself falling in love with a woman who was 3 weeks away from leaving for Italy. He didn't tell her. Didn't even fully admit it to himself. But he knew something had shifted when he found himself in the conservatory late one night, surrounded by the plants they'd saved together, missing someone who hadn't even left yet. "You're brooding." Elena's voice came from the doorway. Rowan turned to find her watching him with knowing eyes. "I'm thinking," he corrected. "About? About how quiet this place is going to be without you arguing with me about plant placement." Elena moved into the conservatory, her nightdress ghostly in the moonlight streaming through the glass. "You could come with me. To Florence, I mean." Rowan's heart stuttered. "What?" "I've been thinking about it. You said you wanted a partnership. Well, partners don't spend 6 months apart if they don't have to. You could come, see the city, meet Juliana. We could—" She stopped, searching for words. "We could start our marriage there instead of waiting." It was tempting. Terrifyingly tempting. But Rowan shook his head. "No." "Why not?" "Because you need this time to be yours, not compromised by my presence or my title. You need to prove, to yourself more than anyone, that your work stands on its own merit." He moved toward her slowly. "And because when we marry, I want you to choose it. Not accept it as the least bad option, but actually choose it. 6 months apart will tell us both whether this," he gestured between them, "is real or just proximity and crisis bonding." Elena looked at him for a long moment. "You're wiser than you pretend to be. And you're braver than you believe you are." She closed the distance between them, stood close enough that he could count the freckles across her nose. "I'm going to miss you," she said quietly. "Good," Rowan replied. "Missing someone means they matter." Elena rose on her toes and kissed him, longer this time, deeper, full of promise and goodbye, and something that felt like the beginning of love. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright. 6 months, she said, "and then I'll come back and we'll build something extraordinary." 6 months, Rowan agreed. Neither of them knew that in 3 weeks everything would change, that Elena's ship to Italy would encounter a storm that would make their first meeting look gentle, that she would arrive in Florence with a decision already made, one that would shock even Rowan with its audacity. But that night, in the conservatory they'd rebuilt together, they simply held each other and pretended 6 months wasn't an eternity. The morning Elena left for Florence, the entire household gathered to see her off. Mrs. Graves wept openly. The stable hands who'd watched her restore the conservatory bowed with genuine respect. Even Thomas the steward, who prided himself on emotional restraint, clasped her hand and wished her well. Rowan stood apart from the crowd, armored in ducal formality because it was the only thing keeping him from begging her to stay. Elena approached him last, her traveling cloak already fastened, her luggage loaded onto the carriage that would take her to the port. "This is it," she said. "This is it," Rowan echoed. "Thank you for everything, for hiding me, for understanding me, for giving me this chance. Thank you for breaking into my house and disrupting my entire existence." Elena laughed, a sound Rowan had memorized without meaning to. "Write to me? Every week. Tell me about the conservatory, about estate business, about anything that matters to you. I will if you'll tell me about Florence, about your studies, about the person you're becoming. Deal." They stood there, two people about to be separated by half a continent, trying to memorize each other's faces. Then Elena did something that shocked everyone watching. She removed her glove, took Rowan's hand, and pressed something into his palm. He looked down. It was a pressed flower, a snakeshed fritillary, perfectly preserved. "So you remember," she said softly, "that some things are worth waiting for." Then she was in the carriage, and the horses were moving, and Rowan was watching the woman he loved disappear down the tree-lined drive. He stood there long after the carriage vanished. Stood there until Mrs. Graves gently suggested he come inside. Stood there holding a pressed flower and wondering how 6 months could possibly feel survivable. He didn't know that in Florence, Elena would make a discovery that would change everything. He didn't know that the storm brewing on the political horizon would force his hand in ways he couldn't predict. And he absolutely didn't know that the next time he saw Elena Whitlock, she would be standing in front of a crowd of Europe's most prestigious scientists, defending a thesis so radical it would either make her career or destroy it completely. All he knew was that his house felt empty, his conservatory felt haunted, and his heart felt like it had been carved out and sent to Italy in a traveling trunk. 6 months had never seemed longer. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after Elena left. Rowan found it on his breakfast tray, delivered with the morning post. Her handwriting was distinctive, quick, elegant strokes that somehow managed to be both precise and passionate. He opened it with hands that weren't entirely steady. "Dearest Rowan, I'm writing this from a cafe overlooking the Arno River, watching the sunrise turn the water to gold. Florence is exactly as beautiful as everyone promised and completely overwhelming in ways I didn't expect. The city is alive with art and science in a way London never was. People here don't see creativity and scholarship as separate pursuits. They're woven together like threads in fabric. Juliana is remarkable, stern, demanding, and absolutely brilliant. She took one look at my portfolio and told me I had talent but no discipline. She said I draw like someone self-taught, true, and think like someone who's never had to defend their theories to hostile audiences, also true. So she's putting me through what she calls intellectual boot camp. I spend mornings in her studio learning proper scientific illustration technique, afternoons in the botanical gardens documenting specimens, and evenings presenting my findings to her circle of colleagues who tear apart every conclusion I draw. It's exhausting. It's terrifying. It's the most alive I've felt in my entire life. How is Thornmere? How is the conservatory? Are the orchids I propagated surviving? I dream about that glass cathedral sometimes, about the morning light through dusty windows and your terrible jokes about Latin nomenclature. Write back and tell me I'm not imagining that the week we spent together was real. Tell me you're still willing to wait 6 months for someone you barely know. Tell me—" The letter ended there, as if she'd lost her nerve about finishing that sentence. Rowan read it 3 times, then carried it to the conservatory where he wrote his response among the plants she'd saved. His letter was longer than intended. He told her about estate business and political maneuvering, about the scandals still simmering in society circles, about how the conservatory felt haunted by her absence. And at the end, because honesty had become their foundation, he wrote something he hadn't planned to. "You asked me to tell you that week was real. It was. It is. Every day you're gone proves it more completely. I find myself reaching for conversations we never finished, wanting to show you botanical specimens I discover, missing arguments about plant placement that I once found irritating. I'm waiting 6 months not out of duty, but out of certainty. Whatever we're building is worth the distance. Don't doubt that. The letters came weekly after that. Elena's grew longer, more detailed, full of botanical discoveries and academic battles. She wrote about presenting her research to skeptical colleagues who couldn't believe a woman, especially an aristocratic one, could produce rigorous scientific work. About the other female scholars she'd found in Florence's academic circles, women who'd fled their own countries to find intellectual freedom. About the thesis she was developing that challenged conventional botanical taxonomy. Rowan's letters matched hers in length, if not subject. He wrote about the political situation growing tenser in the Northern Territories, about grain shortages that made Elena's father's death more complicated than anyone anticipated, about the conservatory expansion he was planning, designed to incorporate research facilities that would meet scientific standards, about the rumors spreading through society about their unconventional engagement, but mostly they wrote about each other. Small observations that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow meant everything. Elena mentioned that she thought of him every time she saw Trumpet Gentian because he'd actually listened when she explained why the species mattered. Rowan admitted he'd started reading botanical journals just to understand her work better, even though half the terminology still baffled him. 3 months in, Elena's letters changed tone. Rowan, something extraordinary has happened. I've made a discovery, a genuine, potentially significant discovery, and I have no idea what to do with it. You know I've been studying Highland flora specimens in the university's collection. Well, I found something in their archive that no one had properly examined before, a pressed specimen collected 50 years ago from the mountains north of Thornmere. The label identified it as a variety of saxifrage, but the morphology was all wrong. I spent 3 weeks analyzing it, comparing it to every known species, consulting with experts across Europe. It's new, completely undescribed. A species that's been sitting in a collection for half a century because no one looked closely enough to realize what they had. Juliana says I should publish, immediately, that this kind of discovery could establish my reputation as a serious scientist. But there's a problem. The specimen was collected from your lands. Publishing means revealing the location, which could bring collectors and botanists trampling through territories you're responsible for protecting. It could damage the very ecosystem I want to study. I don't know what to do. My career says publish. My ethics say protect. What would you do? Rowan read the letter 3 times, feeling pride and concern war in his chest. Then he did something that surprised himself. He contacted the Royal Botanical Society directly. His letter to their president was blunt. He wanted to fund a protected botanical research station on Thornmere lands, specifically to document and preserve rare highland species. The station would be open to serious researchers, but would include strict protections against overcollection, and he wanted Elena Whitlock named as the founding scientific director. The response came within 2 weeks. The society was interested, pending proper documentation of the species in question, and Elena's thesis defense upon her return to England. Rowan wrote to Elena immediately, "Publish your discovery. I'm establishing protections that will ensure your research site remains intact. And when you come home, you'll have a proper laboratory and research station waiting, not as a duchess's hobby, but as a legitimate scientific facility. Your career and your ethics don't have to be opposed. We'll make them aligned." Elena's response arrived 10 days later. It was shorter than usual, just 3 lines. "How did I get so lucky as to break into your house during a storm? Publishing next month. Coming home sooner than planned. I've made my decision about us. I hope you're ready." Rowan stared at those last 2 sentences for a long time, trying to decipher their meaning. Coming home early could mean many things. So could "made my decision." He had 6 weeks to prepare for whatever she meant. He used them to finish the research station, to formalize protections with the Royal Society, and to brace himself for the possibility that her decision might not be the one he desperately hoped for. The summons came 5 weeks later, not from Elena but from the Royal Botanical Society. They were hosting a special presentation in London. Miss Elena Whitlock would be defending her thesis and presenting her species discovery to the full assembly of European botanical scholars. As her fiancé and the landowner whose property was central to her research, the Duke of Thornmere's presence was requested. requested, as if Rowan would have missed it for anything. He arrived in London 3 days early and immediately regretted it. The social scene had grown vicious in Elena's absence. Lady Pemberton was leading a campaign to have Elena's engagement to Rowan formally questioned on grounds of impropriety. Several prominent families had published letters suggesting that the Duke of Thornmere had been manipulated by an ambitious young woman using her father's death and false botanical credentials to secure a title. The attacks were cruel, calculated, and devastatingly effective. By the time Rowan attended his first society dinner, half of London's aristocracy was convinced Elena was either a fraud or a schemer, possibly both. "It's unseemly," Lady Pemberton announced during the dinner, her voice carrying across the room with practiced projection. A woman claiming scientific expertise while simultaneously trading on her feminine wiles to secure a duke. One wonders what she's really after, knowledge or a coronet. Rowan set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "One wonders," he said, his voice cutting through the conversation like a blade, "why the idea of a woman possessing both intelligence and ambition is so threatening to those who possess neither." The table went silent. Lady Pemberton's face flushed. "I beg your pardon?" "You should. You've spent the last 20 minutes disparaging someone whose botanical research has been published in 3 peer-reviewed journals and praised by the leading scientific minds in Europe. Meanwhile, your own contributions to society consist of what exactly? Hosting dinner parties and spreading malicious gossip? How dare you? How dare I?" Rowan stood, abandoning all pretense of diplomatic courtesy. "How dare you attack a woman whose work you haven't bothered to understand because it challenges your narrow view of what women should be capable of? Elena Whitlock has accomplished more in 6 months than most people manage in a lifetime. She's expanded human knowledge of alpine flora. She's developed cultivation techniques that could prevent species extinction. She's collaborated with the finest scientific minds in Europe. And she's done it all while enduring people like you questioning her motives and credentials." He pulled on his gloves with sharp, angry movements. "I'll be attending her thesis defense in 3 days," he continued. "I suggest anyone curious about her actual qualifications do the same. You might learn something about both botany and courage." He left before anyone could respond, feeling satisfaction war with concern. He'd just publicly defended Elena in a way that would either validate her work or make them both look foolish if her presentation failed. Everything depended on 3 days from now. The morning of Elena's defense, Rowan woke to find London blanketed in unseasonable fog. He dressed with military precision, formal morning clothes that announced his ducal status without being ostentatious. The presentation was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the Royal Society's headquarters. He arrived at 9:30 to find the lecture hall already packed. The crowd was a fascinating mix. Serious-looking academics cluttered the front rows, their notebooks ready. Several prominent aristocrats, including, Rowan noted with grim satisfaction, Lady Pemberton, occupied the middle section, clearly there to watch Elena fail. The back was filled with younger women, students and aspiring scholars whose presence announced their support for one of the few women daring to enter their field. Rowan took a seat in the 3rd row, close enough to see Elena's face, but far enough back to avoid distracting her. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doors at the side of the hall opened. Elena walked in, and Rowan's breath stopped. She'd changed in 6 months. Not dramatically, she was still recognizably herself, but something fundamental had shifted. She wore a simple dark dress, no jewelry except a small pendant he didn't recognize. Her hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp intelligence in her face. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent months defending her ideas to hostile audiences. She looked like a scholar. She looked like herself, finally, completely. Their eyes met across the room. Elena's expression flickered. Surprise, pleasure, something that might have been fear, then settled into determined focus. She set up her materials with practiced efficiency. Detailed botanical illustrations, pressed specimens under glass, maps marking collection sites. The president of the Royal Society introduced her with careful neutrality, noting her unique background and controversial subject matter. Then Elena began to speak, and the room transformed. "Gentlemen and ladies," she nodded to the women in the back, "I'm here to present evidence for a new species of saxifrage." Saxifraga whitlockii, discovered in the highland regions of northern England. Her voice was clear, steady, absolutely certain. She walked the audience through her methodology, the initial discovery of the archived specimen, the comparative analysis with known species, the field research she'd conducted during holiday breaks from her Florence studies. What makes this discovery significant, Elena continued, pulling out her most detailed illustration, is not just that we've identified a new species, but what it tells us about alpine adaptation strategies. This saxifrage has developed a unique mechanism for surviving extreme cold that differs from all related species. Understanding this mechanism could have implications for agriculture, for understanding climate adaptation, for predicting how plant communities respond to environmental stress. She presented data, morphological comparisons, chemical analysis of the plant's cellular structure, geographic distribution mapping. Every argument was supported by evidence, every conclusion carefully defended. The academics in the front row leaned forward, taking notes furiously. The aristocrats in the middle shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the technical rigor. Lady Pemberton's expression grew progressively more pinched. Then came the questions. "Miss Whitlock," said an elderly botanist from Cambridge, "your analysis suggests this species is endemic to a very small geographic area. How do you propose protecting it from overcollection by enthusiasts who might damage the population?" Elena smiled, a sharp, knowing expression. "I'm glad you asked. The Duke of Thornmere," her eyes found Rowan's, "has agreed to establish the first protected botanical research station in England on the lands where this species grows. Access will be restricted to credentialed researchers operating under strict collection protocols. We'll be creating a model for how scientific research and conservation can coexist." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A research station? Funded by a duke? For a woman's botanical work? Another question came, this one from a French botanist with obvious skepticism. "These illustrations are extraordinarily detailed. Who actually produced them? Surely you had assistance from professional illustrators." The implication was clear. A woman couldn't possibly have created such technically precise work. Elena's expression didn't change, but Rowan saw her hand tighten on her portfolio. "I produced every illustration you see here, monsieur. I can demonstrate my technique if you doubt my abilities. In fact," she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pencil, "if you'll give me a specimen, I'll create a detailed illustration right now while we continue the discussion." The French botanist blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Someone from the back called out, "Use the specimen on the president's desk, the Rosa rubiginosa." Elena walked to the desk, examined the rose specimen briefly, then returned to her position and began sketching while simultaneously fielding more questions. Her hands moved with practiced precision, capturing details while her mind engaged with complex theoretical challenges. "Miss Whitlock, your thesis suggests revolutionary implications for taxonomy. Not revolutionary, just rigorous. We've been classifying alpine species based on superficial morphology without adequate attention to adaptation mechanisms." Her pencil never stopped moving. "But surely such work requires laboratory facilities unavailable to women? Perhaps in England. In Florence, Signora Rossi's laboratory operates on merit, not gender. I had full access to microscopy, chemical analysis, and collaborative expertise. But she was adding shading now, building depth. The questions came faster. Elena answered each one while completing her illustration. After 20 minutes, she set down her pencil and held up the finished drawing. The Rosa rubiginosa was rendered in perfect scientific detail. Every petal, every stamen, every subtle variation in leaf structure captured with museum-quality precision. The lecture hall went absolutely silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. The sound spread, first the young women, then the academics, finally even some of the aristocrats who'd come hoping to watch her fail. Elena stood there, holding her illustration, and Rowan saw tears shining in her eyes that she refused to let fall. The president of the Royal Society stood. "I believe we've seen sufficient evidence of Miss Whitlock's qualifications. The formal vote on accepting her species description will occur next week, but I suspect I can predict the outcome." He turned to Elena. "Welcome to the scientific community, Dr. Whitlock. You've earned your place here." Dr. Whitlock. The title rang through the hall like a bell. Elena's hands shook as she gathered her materials. The academics swarmed forward with questions. The young women waited patiently for their chance to speak with her. Even some of the skeptical aristocrats approached with grudging respect. Rowan stayed seated, watching the woman he loved claim her victory. Lady Pemberton left without speaking to anyone, her face tight with humiliation. It took an hour for the crowd to disperse. Finally, Elena was alone at the front of the hall, packing up her specimens with careful precision. Rowan approached slowly, giving her time to notice him. She looked up, and the professional mask crumbled. "I did it," she whispered. "You did." "They believed me. They actually believed me. Because you gave them no choice. You were brilliant." Elena laughed, a sound edged with hysteria and relief. "I was terrified the entire time. I thought I'd forget everything or drop a specimen or—" "You didn't. You were perfect." She set down the specimen case, turned to face him fully. "I made my decision." Rowan's heart hammered. "And? I'm coming home, not because the 6 months are over or because society expects it. I'm coming home because I miss you, because every discovery I make, my first thought is wanting to share it with you, because partnership sounds better than independence if the partner is you." Rowan felt something tight in his chest finally release. "You're sure?" "Completely. I've proven I can build a career. I've earned respect from the scientific community. I've done everything I set out to do." Elena crossed the distance between them. "Now I want to build something new. The research station you proposed, a laboratory where young women can study alongside men, a marriage that shows the world that women don't have to choose between intellect and partnership." "That sounds terrifyingly ambitious." "Good." Elena smiled, that fierce, fearless expression he'd fallen in love with. "I'm not interested in safe anymore." Rowan should have maintained propriety, should have remembered they were in the Royal Society's lecture hall where anyone could walk in. He kissed her anyway. It was deeper than their previous kisses, more certain. It tasted like victory and homecoming, and the beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. When they finally broke apart, Elena was laughing. "What?" Rowan asked. "Lady Pemberton is going to have an absolute fit when she hears we kissed in the Royal Society building." "Let her." Rowan pulled Elena close again, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm done caring what society thinks. I care what you think, what you want, what we can build together." "Then let's build something extraordinary," Elena said. They stood there in the empty lecture hall, surrounded by botanical specimens and the lingering scent of old books, making plans that would shock society and change their world. Neither of them noticed the young woman sketching from the doorway, an artist from the London Gazette who'd been assigned to cover the presentation. Her drawing would appear in the next morning's paper. The Duke of Thornmere and Dr. Elena Whitlock, clearly in love, surrounded by scientific instruments and looking absolutely unconcerned with propriety. The image would become famous. It would scandalize half of London and inspire the other half. It would mark the beginning of a shift in how people thought about women's education, about marriage, about what partnerships could look like when built on mutual respect instead of social obligation. But that night, Rowan and Elena simply walked through London's foggy streets, talking about research stations and wedding plans and all the ways they were going to prove everyone wrong about what a duchess could be. "When?" Rowan asked as they reached his London townhouse. "When what?" "When do you want to get married? We could wait until the research station is finished, or until the society scandal dies down, or—" "Next month," Elena interrupted. Rowan stopped walking. "Next month? Why wait? We've already spent 6 months apart. I don't want to waste more time being proper when we could be building our life together." Elena turned to face him on the foggy street. "Unless you've changed your mind about wanting a wife who'll embarrass you at dinner parties?" "I haven't changed anything except my capacity for patience." Rowan pulled her close. "Next month it is. Small wedding, like you wanted. Just us and the promises that actually matter. And then we shock society by actually being happy together. Sounds perfect." They sealed the agreement with another kiss, there on the foggy London street, while somewhere in the distance church bells rang midnight. 6 months ago, Elena had broken into Rowan's house seeking escape. Now she was choosing to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Not as a captive duchess, but as a partner with her own power and purpose. It wasn't the ending anyone expected. It was something better, a beginning built on choice and courage, and the radical idea that love and freedom weren't opposites, but allies. The story would have ended there, neatly resolved with triumph and romance. But 3 days later, a letter arrived that would test everything they'd built and force them into their greatest battle yet. The letter bore the royal seal. Rowan opened it in his study with Elena beside him, both of them still celebrating her scientific success. He read it once quickly, then again slowly, feeling cold spread through his chest. "What is it?" Elena asked. Rowan handed her the letter, watched her face change as she read. The king himself had written. He'd heard about the scandalous engagement, the runaway bride, the unconventional research, the duke who was apparently allowing his future wife to pursue scientific work instead of proper aristocratic duties. His Majesty was concerned that such behavior set a poor example for young women of quality. He was requesting that the Duke of Thornmere reconsider the engagement, or, at minimum, ensure his future duchess abandoned her unseemly academic pursuits. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command dressed in polite language. "Can't do this," Elena whispered. "He can. He's the king." "But my research, the station, everything we've planned." Rowan felt rage build in his chest. They'd fought so hard. Elena had proven herself so completely. And now one man's traditional views threatened to destroy it all. "What do we do?" Elena asked. Rowan looked at the woman he loved, brilliant, brave, freshly triumphant from her scientific victory. Looked at the future they'd planned together. Looked at the choice he was being forced to make between duty to crown and loyalty to the person who'd changed his entire world. And made a decision that would either save them or destroy everything he'd ever built. "We fight," he said. "Against the king?" "Against anyone who tries to cage you." Rowan's voice was steel. "I didn't spend 6 months falling in love with your mind just to watch society crush it. We're going to that royal court. We're going to make our case, and we're going to prove that a duchess can be a scientist without the kingdom collapsing." Elena stared at him. "You're serious? Completely? You could lose everything, your title, your lands, your position." "I could lose you," Rowan corrected. "That's the only loss I'm not willing to risk." Elena's eyes filled with tears she finally let fall. "When did you become this person?" "The moment you broke into my house and taught me what courage looks like." They stood there, facing the greatest challenge of their lives, and chose each other over everything else. The battle for their future was just beginning. But for the first time, they were fighting it together. The royal summons arrived 2 days later, delivered by a courier wearing the king's livery and an expression that suggested he pitied anyone foolish enough to defy his majesty. Rowan and Elena were requested, commanded really, to appear at court in 1 week to discuss the irregularities surrounding their engagement and Miss Whitlock's unseemly public activities. 1 week, Elena said, staring at the ornate paper. "That's barely enough time to prepare a defense." "Then we don't defend." Rowan was already moving toward his desk, pulling out fresh paper. "We attack." "Attack the king?" Elena's voice pitched high with disbelief. "Attack the assumptions, the tradition, the idea that women's education threatens social order." Rowan began writing with fierce concentration. "The king's concern isn't really about you. It's about what you represent, change. Women claiming power beyond their assigned roles. If we try to justify or apologize, we've already lost. We need to make the case that your work strengthens the kingdom, not weakens it." Elena moved to stand beside him, reading over his shoulder. "You're writing to the Royal Society, and the university, and every prominent scientist whose work you've cited in your papers, and the Agricultural Ministry, because your research on highland plants has direct applications for crop resilience." Rowan's pen scratched across paper. "We're going to walk into that throne room with enough institutional support that the king can't dismiss you as one eccentric woman. We're making this about national interest." "That's brilliant," Elena breathed, "and completely insane. Do you have a better plan?" "No, which is why we're doing yours." She pulled up a chair, grabbed her own pen. "I'll write to Juliana and her colleagues. European scientific support might carry weight, and I'll compile documentation of every practical application my research could have. Medicine, agriculture, conservation. We'll bury them in evidence that this isn't just abstract academics. They worked through the night and into the next day, building their case with the same meticulous care Elena applied to her botanical illustrations. Letters went out by the dozen. Responses started arriving within days, cautious at first, then increasingly supportive as word spread about what they were attempting. The president of the Royal Society wrote that he would personally attend the royal audience to testify to Miss Whitlock's scientific contributions. 3 prominent professors offered to provide documentation of her research quality. Giuliana Rossi sent a letter so passionate in its defense of Elena's genius that Rowan found himself grinning despite the circumstances. But the most unexpected support came from an unlikely source. 5 days before the royal audience, a carriage arrived at Rowan's London townhouse, bearing the crest of the Duchess of Ashford, one of the most powerful women in the kingdom, known for her political acumen and her complete disregard for social convention. The Duchess herself swept into Rowan's study without waiting for formal introduction. She was 70, if she was a day, dressed in purple silk and wearing enough jewels to fund a small army. Her eyes were sharp as cut glass. "So," she announced, settling into Rowan's chair without invitation, "you're the Duke fool enough to let his bride have a brain. Good. About time someone in your generation showed some sense." Rowan exchanged glances with Elena, who looked equally bewildered. "Your Grace, we weren't expecting—" "Of course you weren't. I don't make social calls, waste of time. But I heard about this royal audience nonsense and decided to insert myself into your business." The Duchess pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I've been collecting signatures, every woman of title in London who's tired of pretending to be decorative. We're submitting a formal petition to His Majesty requesting that he expand educational opportunities for women of quality rather than restricting them." Elena moved forward slowly. "You're supporting us?" "I'm supporting the idea that women shouldn't have to choose between marriage and meaningful work. I had to. Made myself miserable for 40 years playing the perfect duchess, while my husband squandered the family fortune on mistresses and gambling. If I'd been allowed to manage our estates myself, we'd be twice as wealthy, and I'd be half as bitter." The Duchess's smile was razor sharp. "So yes, girl, I'm supporting you, and I'm bringing 60 other titled women with me to that audience. Let's see the king dismiss this as one eccentric female when half the aristocratic ladies in the kingdom are standing behind you." Rowan felt hope flare for the first time since receiving the king's letter. "Your Grace, that's strategic. I'm not doing this out of altruism. I'm doing it because change is coming whether the old guard likes it or not, and I'd rather be remembered as someone who accelerated progress than someone who died clutching outdated traditions." She stood, adjusted her jewels. "The audience is in 2 days. My carriage will collect you both. We're arriving together, a united front. Wear something that makes you look intelligent, Miss Whitlock. Not pretty. Intelligent. There's a difference." Then she swept out as dramatically as she'd arrived, leaving Rowan and Elena staring at each other in stunned silence. "Did that actually just happen?" Elena asked. "I think we just acquired a very dangerous ally. She's terrifying. She's perfect." Rowan pulled Elena into his arms. "We might actually win this." Elena buried her face against his chest. "Or we might lose spectacularly and destroy both our futures. Then we'll lose together. I can live with that." "I can't." Elena pulled back, her eyes fierce. "I can't let you sacrifice everything for me. If it comes down to it, if the king demands you choose between your title and our marriage, I choose you." Rowan's voice was absolute. "Every time. Without hesitation. You need to understand that, Elena. I'm not doing this to be noble or prove a point. I'm doing it because a life without you in it isn't worth the title." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. "How did I get so lucky?" "You broke into the right house during the right storm." She laughed through her tears, and Rowan kissed her, and for a moment the weight of the coming battle lifted. But only for a moment. The day of the royal audience arrived cold and gray. Rowan dressed in formal court attire with military precision, every button and medal exactly right. Elena wore a deep green dress that was elegant without being frivolous, her hair pulled back to show her face clearly. She looked like exactly what she was, a scholar prepared to defend her life's work. The Duchess of Ashford's carriage collected them at dawn. Inside, the Duchess surveyed them with critical eyes. Good. You both look appropriately serious. Remember, this isn't about romance or scandal. This is about national policy and the kingdom's future. Frame everything in those terms. His Majesty cares about power and legacy, not individual happiness. I understand, Elena said quietly. Do you? Because you look terrified. I am terrified. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it make you small. You've earned your place in that throne room through merit. Own it. The Duchess's expression softened fractionally. My granddaughter wants to study medicine. The university won't admit women. If you win today, maybe she'll have a chance. So win. The weight of that, of fighting not just for herself, but for every woman who'd come after, settled over Elena like armor. By the time they reached the palace, she'd stopped shaking. The throne room was packed. Rowan had expected the king's advisors and maybe a few curious courtiers. Instead, he found himself walking into what looked like a formal assembly of the kingdom's power structure. The right side of the room was filled with traditionalists, Lady Pemberton and her allies, several conservative lords, representatives from the church. They wore expressions of grim satisfaction, clearly anticipating Elena's humiliation. The left side was a revelation. The Duchess of Ashford's 60 titled women occupied the front rows, a wall of aristocratic female power. Behind them stood the scientists, the Royal Society president, university professors, researchers whose work Elena had cited. At the very back, Rowan spotted something that made his chest tight. Young women, dozens of them, students and aspiring scholars who'd somehow gained entry to witness this moment. Elena saw them too. Rowan watched her spine straighten, her chin lift. The king entered with full ceremony. He was younger than Rowan expected, perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and the bearing of a man who'd never been successfully challenged. He settled onto his throne with casual power, gestured for everyone to rise from their bows. Well, His Majesty said, his voice carrying across the silent room, this is quite the gathering. I expected a private conversation about an irregular engagement. Instead, I appear to have sparked a political movement. Duke Blackthorn, would you care to explain why half of London's intelligentsia is crowded into my throne room? Rowan stepped forward. Your Majesty, you express concern about my fiancé's scientific work setting a poor example for young women. I believed you deserved to hear from experts about the actual value of her contributions before making policy decisions that could impact the kingdom's future. The king's eyebrow rose. Policy decisions? I merely suggested your bride should behave with appropriate decorum. With respect, Your Majesty, your suggestions carry the weight of law. If you publicly discourage women's education, universities and scientific institutions will follow your lead. We'll lose half our potential intellectual capital because tradition says women should be decorative rather than productive. A murmur rippled through the conservative side of the room. Lady Pemberton looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. That's quite a claim, Duke Blackthorn. The king's tone was unreadable. You're suggesting my personal opinions about appropriate feminine behavior could damage the kingdom's intellectual advancement? I'm suggesting, Your Majesty, that talent is distributed without regard for gender, but opportunity is not. And that's a waste we can't afford. Interesting. The king's eyes shifted to Elena. Miss Whitlock, you've been remarkably quiet. Surely you have opinions about this debate concerning your future. Elena stepped forward. Rowan saw her hands tremble once, then steady. Your Majesty, I'm a botanist. My work involves studying how plants adapt to survive in harsh environments. I've learned that the species that survive aren't the strongest or the prettiest. They're the ones that evolve, that adapt to changing conditions instead of clinging to what worked in the past. Are you comparing the kingdom to a plant, Miss Whitlock? I'm comparing tradition to environment. The world is changing. Education is spreading. Women in other countries are entering universities, publishing research, contributing to knowledge. If England clings to the idea that half our population should be excluded from intellectual pursuits, we'll be left behind by nations that adapt faster. Bold words from someone whose own education was apparently achieved through unconventional means. Yes, Your Majesty. I had to sneak my learning like a thief because formal education was denied to me. Imagine what I could have achieved if I'd been allowed to study openly. Imagine what hundreds of other women with similar talent could contribute if given the same opportunities as men. The king leaned forward slightly. And you believe your botanical research has practical value beyond personal fulfillment? I know it does. Elena's voice gained strength. The species I discovered has adaptive mechanisms that could inform crop development. My documentation of medicinal plants has already been used by village healers to improve rural healthcare. The conservation protocols I'm establishing will protect resources for future generations. This isn't abstract academics, it's applied science with real-world benefits. She's correct, Your Majesty. The Royal Society president stepped forward. I've reviewed Miss Whitlock's work personally. It meets the highest standards of scientific rigor. Her discovery of Saxifraga whitlocki is already being cited by researchers across Europe. Dismissing her contributions because of her gender would be academically indefensible. A professor from Cambridge added his voice. Her research methods are sound. Her conclusions are well supported. She's contributed meaningfully to human knowledge. That contribution doesn't become less valuable because she's female. One by one, the scientists spoke. Each testimony built on the last, creating an overwhelming case for Elena's legitimacy as a scholar. The conservative side of the room grew increasingly uncomfortable. Then the Duchess of Ashford stood. Your Majesty, she said, her voice cutting through the testimonies, I'm 72 years old. I've served this kingdom faithfully my entire life. I've birthed heirs, managed estates, and represented our nation with dignity. And I've spent those 72 years watching brilliant women waste their potential because society told them intelligence was unfeminine. She gestured to the women around her. Every woman in this room has a similar story. Talent suppressed, ambitions redirected into acceptable channels, minds starved of challenge because education was deemed inappropriate. We've been patient, we've been proper, and we're done pretending that wasting half the kingdom's intellectual resources is somehow in the national interest. Lady Pemberton shot to her feet. This is outrageous. Your Majesty, these women are advocating for the complete destruction of social order. If we allow females to pursue education and careers, who will manage households? Who will raise children? Society will collapse. Society collapsed? The Duchess of Ashford's laugh was scathing. My dear, I managed a household of 40 servants, raised 6 children, and somehow still found time to read. Women are capable of multiple roles. Men have never had to choose between family and intellectual pursuits. Why should we? Because it's natural order. Men are suited for public life, women for domestic. Natural order? Elena interrupted, her voice sharp. Forgive me, Lady Pemberton, but I'm a scientist. I study nature, and nothing in nature suggests female organisms are inherently less capable of complex thought than males. Sexual dimorphism in humans is about physical size, not intellectual capacity. The only thing that's natural here is that you've confused social convention for biological fact. The young women at the back of the room started applauding. The sound spread. First the scientists, then some of the titled women, finally even a few courtiers who'd been watching with growing interest. The king raised his hand. Silence fell instantly. Miss Whitlock, he said, you've made your case eloquently. The scientific community clearly values your work. These ladies, he gestured to the Duchess of Ashford and her allies, clearly support expanded opportunities for women. But I must consider the broader social implications. If I endorse your unconventional path, I set a precedent. Every ambitious young woman in the kingdom will point to you as justification for pursuing careers over marriage. Not over marriage, Your Majesty. Rowan stepped forward again. Alongside it, I'm not asking Elena to choose between being my duchess and being a scientist. I'm asking for permission to build a marriage that accommodates both roles. She'll fulfill every social obligation required of her position. She'll simply also continue her research. And you believe that's possible? That a duchess can manage both responsibilities adequately? I believe it's not only possible but beneficial. A duchess who understands agriculture and conservation can contribute meaningfully to estate management. A duchess who commands respect from the scientific community brings prestige to our nation. A duchess who proves women can be both intelligent and graceful challenges other nations to expand their own thinking. Rowan met the king's eyes directly. Your Majesty, England has always led Europe in innovation. This is our chance to lead in social progress as well. The king was silent for a long moment. His eyes swept the room. The conservative lords looking outraged, the women looking hopeful, the scientists looking expectant. Finally, he spoke. Duke Blackthorn, you've argued passionately for an unconventional arrangement. These scholars have testified to Miss Whitlock's legitimate qualifications. These ladies have made clear that this issue extends beyond one woman's ambitions. He paused. I'm not convinced society is ready for wholesale change, but I am convinced that preventing talented individuals from contributing to the kingdom's welfare is wasteful. Rowan felt his heart hammering. Was this approval or sophisticated rejection? Therefore, the king continued, I will not oppose your marriage or Miss Whitlock's continued scientific work. However, his voice sharpened. I'm making this conditional. You will establish your research station. You will publish your findings. And in 3 years, you will report back to this court with evidence that a woman can successfully manage both aristocratic duties and serious scholarship. If you succeed, I'll consider expanding educational opportunities for women more broadly. If you fail, this experiment ends, and we return to traditional expectations. Elena's breath caught. Your Majesty, that's a challenge, Miss Whitlock. Prove me wrong about the incompatibility of these roles. Prove these conservative lords wrong about women's capabilities. You have 3 years to demonstrate that your model works. I suggest you use them wisely. The king stood, signaling the audience's end. But before he left, he added, And Miss Whitlock, I expect your research station to produce results worthy of the controversy you've caused. Don't disappoint me. Then he was gone, and the throne room erupted. The conservative faction stormed out, Lady Pemberton practically vibrating with fury. The scientists surged forward, congratulating Elena with academic enthusiasm. The titled women surrounded them both, offering support and asking pointed questions about how the research station would operate. The young women at the back waited patiently until the crowd thinned, then approached Elena with something close to reverence. Thank you, one of them said simply. My father forbade me from studying mathematics, but now, maybe, Elena agreed, her voice thick with emotion. Keep studying, keep fighting, we'll build this together. Rowan watched her with these young women, saw the moment Elena fully understood the weight she was carrying. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was the symbol every woman with forbidden dreams would point to as proof that change was possible. It should have been terrifying. Instead, Elena looked energized. They returned to Thornmere a week later as an officially engaged couple with royal approval, however conditional, to build their experimental life. The estate staff greeted them with cautious celebration. Mrs. Graves wept openly. Even Thomas the steward allowed himself a small smile. The wedding was held 3 weeks later, exactly as Elena had wanted. Small, honest, and focused on the promises that actually mattered. The Duchess of Ashford attended as witness, along with Giuliana Rossi, who traveled from Florence specifically for the ceremony. The Royal Society president gave a toast about the scientific method applying to marriage. It should have been ridiculous, but somehow felt perfect. Elena wore a dress she'd designed herself, elegant but practical, with pockets for botanical specimens. Rowan wore his military dress uniform. They exchanged vows in the conservatory they'd restored together, surrounded by the plants that had started everything. I promise, Elena said, her voice steady, to be your partner in building something new, to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right. To bring my whole self to this marriage, not just the part society deems acceptable. I promise, Rowan replied, to protect your freedom as fiercely as I protect this estate, to champion your work even when it's inconvenient, to build a life with you where love and respect matter more than tradition. They sealed those promises with a kiss that made the Duchess of Ashford sigh and mutter something about young people and proper decorum. Then they got to work. The research station rose from the grounds of Thornmere over the next 6 months. It wasn't just a laboratory, it was a statement. Proper scientific facilities operated by credentialed researchers. A library open to female students. Residential quarters for visiting scholars. greenhouses designed to Elena's exact specifications. They funded it partly through Rowan's estate income, partly through grants from scientific institutions eager to be associated with such an innovative project. The first round of applicants for research positions included women from across Europe, botanists, chemists, naturalists, all desperate for legitimate workspace. Elena interviewed each one personally, chose 6 to form the initial team, and set them to work documenting the Highland flora with rigorous methodology. The aristocracy watched with scandalized fascination. A duchess running a research facility, employing women in scientific positions, publishing papers under her own name while simultaneously hosting estate dinners and managing household staff? It should have been impossible. Elena made it look inevitable. She developed a schedule that would have destroyed a less determined person. Mornings in the laboratory, afternoons handling social obligations, evenings writing up research findings. She attended every required social function but turned conversations from gossip to genuine intellectual discourse. She proved, repeatedly and publicly, that a woman could be both graceful and brilliant. Not everyone was convinced. Lady Pemberton led a faction that continued to criticize, to predict failure, to insist the experiment would end in disaster. Elena responded by publishing 3 more papers in her first year of marriage, by establishing partnerships with medical researchers to study the pharmaceutical properties of Highland plants, by presenting at academic conferences while pregnant with her first child. That last detail scandalized society even more than the research station. A duchess, visibly expecting, giving scientific presentations? Unthinkable. Elena did it anyway, her arguments so compelling that even her critics had to acknowledge the quality of her work. Rowan watched her navigate it all with a combination of pride and awe. She was exhausting to keep up with, frequently exasperating in her single-minded focus, and absolutely magnificent. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They argued about balancing research with social obligations, about whether to accept speaking invitations that would take Elena away from the estate, about how to handle the constant scrutiny from people waiting for them to fail. But they argued as partners, with respect and honesty, and they always found their way back to the core truth. They'd chosen this difficult path together, and neither would have traded it for an easier one. The first year passed, then the second. The research station published findings that were being cited across Europe. Female students who'd studied there went on to positions at universities and research facilities. The model Elena and Rowan had built started being replicated in other countries. England's scientific community couldn't ignore it. Women were contributing meaningfully, and the kingdom benefited. As the 3rd anniversary of the royal audience approached, Rowan and Elena compiled their evidence, publication records, student placement rates, practical applications of their research, testimonials from scientific institutions. The documentation was overwhelming. Elena had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, including sometimes her own. The day before they were to return to the royal court, Elena found Rowan in the conservatory. She was heavily pregnant with their second child, moving more slowly but still radiating fierce energy. "Are you ready?" she asked. Rowan looked up from the orchid he'd been examining, a species Elena had discovered and cultivated, now named Phalaenopsis rowanii, in his honor. "Are you?" "I'm terrified. Again. Still." Elena settled onto the bench beside him, one hand on her swollen belly. "What if it's not enough? What if the king decides this was all a dangerous experiment and shuts it down? Then we've still proven it works. Other people have seen. The model exists now. They can't erase that. But the students, the women counting on this opportunity, will find other paths because you showed them paths were possible." Rowan took her hand. "Elena, you've already won. Everything else is just documentation." Elena leaned against his shoulder. "I never thanked you properly, you know." "For what?" "For that night in the conservatory when you promised to hide me from my father. For seeing me as a person instead of a problem. For building a life where I don't have to choose between love and work." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "For being brave enough to break every rule that needed breaking." "You did the breaking. I just held the door open." "We did it together. That's the point." Elena's smile was radiant despite her exhaustion. "We proved that partnership can be revolutionary." The next day, they returned to the royal court. This time, there was no drama, no gathering of opposed factions. Just a private audience with the king, the Duchess of Ashford as witness, and the mountain of evidence they'd compiled. The king reviewed their documentation with careful attention, read through publication records and student testimonials, examined letters from scientific institutions praising the research station's contributions. Finally, he looked up. "Well," he said, "this is considerably more successful than I anticipated. You've actually done it, proved a duchess can maintain both social position and serious scholarship." "Not just proved it, Your Majesty," Elena said quietly. "Established it as viable. Other women are already following this model. The question now isn't whether it works, but how we expand it." The king's eyebrow rose. "Expand it?" "Yes. I'd like to establish a formal program at the university. Scholarship opportunities for qualified women. A pathway from our research station to academic positions." Elena's voice was steady, certain. "We've proven the concept works. Now we need to scale it." For a moment, the king just stared at her. Then he started laughing, a genuine sound of surprised respect. "You're remarkable, you know that? 3 years ago, you stood in my throne room begging for the right to continue your work. Now you're demanding I restructure university admissions." He shook his head. "Very well. I'll recommend to the university board that they establish a trial program for female students. If it succeeds, we expand further. Fair?" "Fair," Elena agreed. The king stood, signaling the audience's end. But before they left, he added, "For what it's worth, Duke Blackthorn, Dr. Whitlock, you've made England better, more innovative, more progressive. I'm not sure I'll ever admit that publicly, but privately, well done." They left the palace in a state of shocked triumph. "Did that just happen?" Elena asked as their carriage rolled through London streets. "I think you just changed educational policy for an entire kingdom." "We changed it together." Rowan pulled her close, this brilliant, exhausting, magnificent woman who'd broken into his house during a storm and proceeded to revolutionize his entire existence. "Together," he agreed. 5 years later, the conservatory at Thornmere had become something beyond what either of them had originally imagined. The glass cathedral was filled with exotic species from around the world, meticulously documented by Elena's growing team of researchers. But more than that, it was filled with people. Students, scientists, local farmers learning cultivation techniques, young women studying botany alongside their male peers. The research station had expanded into a full institute, with satellite programs at 3 universities. 60 women had passed through its programs, most moving into professional scientific positions. Elena's publications were standard citations in botanical literature. The conservation protocols she'd developed were being used internationally. She'd become exactly what her father said was impossible: a respected scientist and a successful duchess. The cost had been exhaustion, constant criticism, and the perpetual balancing act of managing multiple demanding roles. But the reward was a life that felt genuinely hers. Rowan found her in the conservatory late one afternoon, surrounded by her students, a mix of young women and men, all listening intently as she explained the reproductive strategy of a rare alpine flower. Their 3 children played nearby, the oldest helping catalog specimens with serious concentration that reminded Rowan of her mother. He watched from the doorway, this scene that had become his daily reality, and felt grateful for a storm that had destroyed a bridge and trapped them together. Elena finished her lecture, released her students to their own research, and made her way to where Rowan stood. "Watching me work again?" she teased. "Admiring my brilliant wife and contemplating how lucky I am that you were terrible at planning escapes." "I was excellent at planning escapes. I just chose not to use them." "Best decision you ever made." "Second best," Elena corrected. "The best was climbing through your window. Everything else followed from that." Rowan pulled her close, mindful of her work-roughened hands and the dirt under her fingernails she never quite managed to eliminate. "Do you ever regret it? The constant scrutiny, the impossible schedule, the critics who still insist you're destroying society?" "Never." Elena's answer was immediate and certain. "This life is hard, but it's mine, ours. And look what we built." She gestured to the conservatory, the students, their children. We changed what's possible, not just for me, for everyone who comes after. Dr. Elena Blackthorne, Duchess of Thornmere, revolutionary botanist and the love of my life. Duke Rowan Blackthorne, supporter of dangerous women and co-conspirator in social upheaval. They kissed there among the flowering plants and laughing students, two people who'd started as strangers, forced together by circumstance, and became partners who'd changed their world. The Duchess of Ashford, visiting for tea, found them like that and snorted with amusement. Still disgustingly happy, I see. Good. Someone should be. She surveyed the conservatory with satisfaction. My granddaughter starts medical school next month, you know. They finally admitted women. She says it's because you proved females could handle rigorous academics while maintaining social position. Elena beamed. I hope she thrives there. She will, because you showed her it was possible. The Duchess's expression turned serious. Thank you for being brave enough to fight when I was too old and too tired. You've given the next generation something I never had. Choice. We gave them a beginning, Elena corrected. They'll build the rest themselves. That's how change works. One generation breaks the door open. The next walks through. The Duchess nodded, satisfied. Then, true to form, she swept away to terrorize the kitchen staff about tea preparations. Rowan and Elena stood together in their conservatory, watching their children play and their students work, and the future unfold exactly as they'd built it, messy and difficult, and absolutely worth every battle. Do you think anyone will remember this? Elena asked quietly. Years from now, will people know about the woman who broke into a duke's house and started a revolution? I think they'll remember that once, a woman chose freedom and a man chose to support her, and together they proved love and progress weren't enemies, but allies. Rowan tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. And even if they don't, we know. Our children know. Every woman who studies at your institute knows. That's legacy enough. Elena nodded, then grinned. Plus, I named a species after you. Phalaenopsis rowani is now part of the scientific record. You're literally immortalized in taxonomy. Best revenge for all those terrible jokes about Latin nomenclature. I prefer to think of it as romantic gesture. Only you would consider species naming romantic. You married a botanist. You knew what you were getting into. I married a woman I found bleeding on my sofa after she broke through my window during a killer storm. Everything after that has been delightful chaos. They stood there as evening light filled the conservatory, turning glass and leaves to gold, holding each other and the life they'd fought so hard to build. The woman who'd ridden through a storm to escape her fate had instead found a future beyond anything she'd imagined. The man who'd spent his life accepting duty without question had learned that sometimes the most responsible thing you could do was break the rules that needed breaking. Together, they'd taken an arranged marriage born from political necessity and transformed it into a partnership that changed their kingdom's understanding of what women could be, what marriage could mean, and what love looked like when it was built on freedom instead of control. Their story would be told for generations, not as a fairy tale of prince and princess, but as something better. A true story of courage and choice, of science and passion, of two people who'd started as strangers forced together by storm and circumstance and became architects of a better world. In the conservatory they'd built together, surrounded by the life they'd chosen and fought for and earned, Elena and Rowan held each other and watched their future bloom. And somewhere in the distant mountains north of Thornmere, a rare species of saxifrage continued to grow, undisturbed, protected, and thriving in the harsh environment that had shaped it into something extraordinary. Just like the woman who'd discovered it, just like the love that had saved them both.